Hello everyone, and welcome to this recording of Crunching the Numbers, Business Management on Organic Farms. This panel took place on January 20th, 2022 and was brought to you by Manitoba Organic Alliance, or MOA. My name is Catherine Boschman and I'm the Program Coordinator here at MOA. Before we get into the panel itself, I just wanted to note that I've included an index in the video description below, so you'll be able to see what kind of topics we covered and easily move to the parts of the video that you're most interested in. And now, without any further ado, enjoy the video.
All right. So we've started recording. We are hoping to make this panel available to anyone who wants to access it and access this important information down the line. So before we get started, I'd like to highlight some of MOA's upcoming events and programs, do a quick Zoom protocol, and then thank our sponsors. So first of all, we'd like to invite you to join us for our biannual Prairie Organics Conference, which is being held virtually this year, February 8th and 9th. We're really excited to offer this interactive online experience in a few short weeks, and we've got a great lineup of speakers. We want to make sure that everyone who comes has the opportunity to meet with other farmers and to meet with grain buyers one-on-one or in small group situations. So we want to make sure there's lots of networking opportunities. This year, in terms of topics, we're focusing on marketing, managing water on your farm, soil health, and integrating livestock. So you can find out more or register at prairieorganics.org. We are also piloting a cost share and agronomy program this year. So farmers can get 50% of costs covered by us up to a certain amount for activities like cover cropping, adding fencing for livestock to cropland, perennial planting, and advice from MOA's agronomist. So to find out details or apply, you can visit our website, which is manitobaorganicaLliance.com, and select cost share program from our menu at the top. Or you can even just send me a message in the chat during the panels, and we can set up a chat over the phone if you prefer to go that route. And just a heads up, the deadline to apply for this is February 17th. So if you're interested, best to look into that soon. So for Zoom protocol, when we start the Q&A period, we ask that if you have a question to raise your virtual hand. To do this, you go to the reactions section at the bottom of your screen in Zoom and select reactions and then click raise hand. And that will highlight your screen so we'll be able to see you. Once you're done asking your question, we'll ask that you lower your hand to avoid confusion so we don't think you have another question to ask. And you can do this by going into reactions and then you should see lower hand. We also ask that everybody keep themselves muted during the presentations just so we can avoid any distracting noise. Okay, so now I would like to thank our sponsors. So our first panel, The Ins and Outs of Organic Cost of Production, is made possible by the generous contributions from the Government of Canada and the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, from the Prairie Organic Development Fund, along with their sponsors, Grain Millers, the Bouta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security and Prairie Heritage Seeds, Roquette, and Sunrise Credit Union. So now I will hand it over to our MC, Anne Kirk, who has been on MOA's board since 2019 and is also a cereal crop specialist at Manitoba Agriculture, as well as an organic farmer. So she does all kinds of things. So Anne, I'll hand this over to you.
Thanks, Catherine. So the first panel today is the ins and outs of organic cost of production. So planning out your cost of production is important to planning a profitable year for all farmers. Organic farms have some unique considerations when it comes to planning cost of production, such as thinking through nutrient budgeting in your soil and integrating cover crops. So farmers on this panel will share their personal systems for managing cost of production, and management specialists will give tips on best practices. So the presentations will be followed by a Q&A session closer to lunchtime. So our first speaker today is Roy Arnott from Manitoba Agriculture, and he'll be talking about calculating cost of production. Roy has an ag degree from the University of Manitoba and has been with Manitoba Agriculture for the past 26 years, working as an ag rep and farm management specialist, responsible for the annual cost of production spreadsheets, for production risk management, farmland rental, and purchasing decision-making. Roy and his wife Marilyn have 2 daughters, and family time is filled with camping, hiking, skiing, and occasionally crashing mountain bikes. So I'll turn it over to Roy now for his presentation.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Everyone can see the screen just fine, just to double check there. All right, okay, thank you very much. Okay, well, I'm gonna jump right in. Wish I was seeing everyone at Ag Day, kind of missed that. 2 years in a row, no Ag Days, big change in my life. So after 2021, it was a bit of a tough year. So Darren and I that pulled together this presentation, we decided to call it What the Farm Management, because that seems to be constantly what we're coming back to is a lot of questions and a lot of uncertainty. There we go. Okay, so lessons from 2021. The drought was certainly the lead story in agriculture for 2021, no question about it. It really could have been worse, like it was in the 80s with drought and low prices. But the severity and the extent of the drought last year really shook our foundation. Quote here, what got you here will not get you there. This quote highlights that the hard-fought lessons of the past are no longer necessarily enough to move us forward successfully into the future. With all the balls up in the air at once, we are literally being forced to change what the farm management. Terrifying words. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Free advice might be worth just that. I don't take myself very seriously, but I do take my work very seriously. So feel free to disagree and start the conversation with me anytime you'd like. What is going to happen in 2022? Well, obviously we don't have a crystal ball. Nothing seems very stable right now. The markets are quite variable and ever changing. Global stocks demands are challenged with climate and politics. Where interest rates going, it's been in the news again this week. We haven't really even talked about the Canadian dollar in a while. So your guess is as good as mine with all of this stuff. 2021 also reminded us that good farmers do a lot of things right. They know and manage their cost of production. They make decisions with data. They use good advisors and they keep learning. Farm Management's Canada's recent dollars and cents study backs this up quite well. So the how-to guide for 2022 crop year, and we're going to unpack some key pieces here in the next 10 minutes on profitability, risk, and planning. So if you want to improve profitability, you need to increase yield, increase price, or decrease cost. So profitability is changed by yield, price, and cost. So I'm going to say that one more time, yield, price, and cost. So you do not disconnect agronomy from economics, and you don't get to work on economics without agronomy. That is simply the fact in this industry. So first thing up, yield. The challenge for 2022 could very well be a repeat drought. We don't know. No one really has a clue on yields for the upcoming crop year, especially in the hard-hit regions of the prairies that are highlighted here in the red and brown that were severely affected by drought in 21. And a key point is the fall soil moisture in Manitoba. All regions of Manitoba were not listed with wet soil conditions in the fall of 21. So we're going to need to keep getting continued winter snow and spring rains for a good start for the 22 season. So what is your limiting factor for organic crops in 2022? We've all been focused on nutrients and fertility in the last number of years, but 21 has been a stark reminder that moisture may still be the ultimate yield limiting factor on the prairies. Some Alberta crop data suggests that it takes 4 to 5 inches of moisture to get the crop to the reproductive stage, and every inch after that produces 5 to 7 bushels of grain. Organic crops will use less total water compared to conventional crops to produce target yields. And that means greater resiliency under adverse conditions, equaling less risk. And that is something to keep in mind as we go through all of the economics and yields that I'm going to talk about here. A few comments about grain prices. I only have charting for conventional crops, but we know markets are linked with similar price drivers. Soybeans here on the purple line has emerged with a price problem since last summer. It has shown some recent improvements, but it is not keeping pace with price increases compared to other crops since midsummer. Wheat is showing some softness in the last couple of weeks, and oats is leveled off. Overall, very fluid market conditions that are moving much more than they were a couple of years ago. You really have to watch the markets. Okay, the only thing left now is to talk about your crop mix and manage the costs as best you can. A great place to start to do your profitability plan is the 2022 Organic Crop Cost of Production document. And it is currently on our website now. If you're looking to find it, you can Google Manitoba crop costs, and you'll find it on our cost of production page, along with the rest of our budgets and calculators. Okay, jumping right in. When we take a look back, organic production costs have increased year over year. 2022 operating costs now $325 to $400 per acre, and total costs are now $525 to $600. The cost increases from 2020, shown in the red boxes, are 104 for oats, 99 for peas, 91 for flax, and 70 for wheat. Costs have definitely gone up. When we compare back to conventional crops, cost increases are quite similar. As with organic crops, the cost increases are mainly due to seed, fertility, fuel, machinery operating, and land costs. When we flip this into profitability for 2022, the organic crops, if we can get the target yields that we're showing COP, and if the prices and costs hold, then the profit margin shown in the green bars here are good. 384 for oats, 442 for hemp, 146 for wheat, and $73 per acre for flax. Peas, barley, soybeans, and fall rye are all showing losses. The change in profitability from 2020 shown in the red boxes are $450 for oats, $243 for hemp, $106 for wheat, and $56 for flax. So some have improved significantly. Comparing it to conventional crops, the projected profitability here is certainly lower, even if we can get the target yields in the COP and if prices and costs hold. If, maybe, hopefully, I just don't have a great handle on profitability based on the yield pricing costs for 2022. Time to talk about risk. Cost increases for conventional crops are ranging from 100 to 125 an acre. So for a 2,500 acre farm, that is adding $250,000 to $300,000 of total cost or added risk. Organic farms are faring better with those cost increases of 50 to 100 per acre. So for a 600 acre organic farm, that is adding $30,000 to $60,000 of total risk total cost or added risk. Every farm is going to feel this in 2022. So the question for many of your farms is, how much production risk are you willing to assume, and what does MASC cover? I've got a few very busy slides here with a lot going on, so kind of let me explain, and we're going to unpack this as we go. Okay, organic wheat has got a target yield of 35 bushels an acre. And if I can get the laser pointer to function, there we go. Okay, so we're looking at 35 bushels an acre up here on this yield chart for a total profit of $146 per acre. The break-even yield is 28 bushels for zero profit. And agri-insurance, the probable yield coverage is 26.6 bushels per acre. So the 80% coverage, the red line here, kicks in at 21 bushels an acre, or a loss of $134 an acre. But that is $34 more coverage compared to the 70% coverage, the circle dash line here, and $154 per acre more coverage compared to the 50% coverage level for a 13 bushel yield. The coverage levels from MASC are all well below the 28 bushel break-even yield. And these charts really do show how sensitive profitability is to changes in yield and price. So this was organic hard red spring wheat. So flipping into comparison to conventional, the 80% coverage is going to cover you for 49 bushels an acre, or a loss right in here of $58 an acre. It's better than organic, but is still a loss. So keep that in mind when you're doing your coverages. Organic oats has a target yield of 82 bushels an acre for an estimated profit of $384, break even at 49 bushels an acre. Agri-insurance probable yield is 48.8 bushels, so the 80% coverage, the red line there, kicks in at 39 bushels, or a loss of 117 an acre, and has $58 more coverage compared to the 70% coverage, the circle dash line there, and $174 per acre more coverage compared to the 50% coverage for a 25 bushel yield. And again, you'll kind of notice that I'm now talking about target yield for the organic slides here, again, compared to the probable yield of the conventional, because the two, that's a key difference, but they are definitely showing some different coverages from MASC. Again, these charts show the sensitivity of profitability to changes to yield and price. It's huge. Comparing back to conventional oats, 80% coverage actually has a profit of $21 an acre. And this is a bit of an anomaly that we're seeing this year with oat coverage and costs, giving you still a bit of a break even, even at an 80% crop. And that is definitely different. And last organic crop here I'm going to highlight here, organic flax has a target yield of 15.5 bushels for an estimated profit of $73 an acre. Break-even yield is 14 bushels. Agri-insurance probable yield is 10.8, so 80% coverage kicks in at 9 bushels, or a loss of 217 an acre, but is $53 more coverage compared to the 70% coverage level for a 7 bushel yield, and $145 an acre more compared to the 50% coverage of a 5 bushel yield. Again, all well below the break even of 14 bushels an acre. Conventional flax, 80% coverage of 19 bushels has a loss of $39 an acre. So it's considerably better than the organic, but still a loss. Okay, other risk management tools. Again, just talked about crop insurance. Hail insurance is certainly another option, but I really wanted to mention agri-stability. I'm not saying it's a perfect program. I'm not saying it's going to cover losses, but it is definitely still worth covering, especially if you're doing your own applications as opposed to getting them done by an accountant. So don't forget about agri-stability, especially when we're in a period of drought and uncertainty. Big part of what we're talking about this year is contingency planning for 2022, because there is certainly a lot of things that we're unsure about, and making a plan is going to be quite important. So here we go. We'll jump into this. So are we going to keep having supply chain issues? We feel it might be a great idea to buy early, take and make delivery when available. So when you look at your plan A and think about your plan B, and possibly have plan C ready to go when things go wrong. Again, we hear about these supply chain issues all the time, and they're going to affect, I think, many farms across the board this year in Manitoba. Another key piece here is, when do you put your wallet back in your pocket? How much drought or price loss do you incur before you stop spending? And I really think that we need to plan for this well in advance, so we don't make emotional decisions, because we all have a tendency that we want to fix things, and deciding now, when is it better to do nothing, compared to, or, when is doing nothing better than doing something? So this is where we really want to take away those emotional reactions that we all tend to make. And if we have low profitability, where exactly is the problem on your farm? And we really are starting into really trying to promote benchmarking as a bit of a solution. But I want to kind of highlight a David Cole quote here. If you benchmark against average, you will be out of business in 5 years. We all need to be better than average to move our farms forward. And that is, again, not a new phenomenon by any means. So I have along with Darren, calculated some Manitoba benchmarks for organic production, and we've based them on the COP, and we're going to be producing a standardized operating statement starting in next year with a COP. So we have benchmarked revenue at $650 per acre up here, based on organic flax, barley, wheat, and oats. And we've got the profitability benchmarked for organic at $65 an acre. And this is a tool that large accounting firms have been using to diagnose low profitability problems. And we're going to start at the top and work our way through this just to highlight what's going on in this statement. So the first thing up here is gross margin ratio, and it should be 60% of revenue after subtracting cost of goods sold. And the four main factors affecting this are crop price, crop yield, input cost, and input quantities. So if your gross margin ratio is low, look at those four factors and examine each of them to try to find the issue. This is often where the problems start for many farms, is right up at the top here. And for example, the soybean price on the conventional side that I mentioned earlier, soybeans has a price problem, so therefore it's going to have a gross margin ratio problem for low profitability right off the start. So this is kind of a key place to start. Flipping into the contribution margin ratio, which should be 45% of revenue after direct operating expenses are subtracted. And the main factors contributing to a problem with contribution margin are too much labor, inefficient machinery for the labor to use, or not enough revenue generated from labor, or overuse of machinery. And key point here is direct operating expenses from our analysis are a potential weakness in an organic system and should be aggressively managed. Up next is operating efficiency ratio, or earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and rent, EBITDAR. And it should be 35% of revenue after the operating overheads are subtracted. And operating overheads aren't usually a problem. This is other cost, hydro, etc. When you get down to operating efficiency ratio, it really gives you a way to compare crops based on their strengths and weaknesses. And we're going to be adding this in, like I mentioned, for the organic COP for 2023. And it really does highlight, again, opportunities for profit and loss. And in the organic side, if you look at the COP, you'll notice something like barley isn't showing great profitability. And when you look at the numbers and the calculations, its operating efficiency ratio does definitely not compete with crops like oats and wheat in the organic budget. So this will become very evident next year when we flip these forward. Okay, and when we get to the bottom line here, we subtract the cost of capital, which is land, machinery, depreciation, opportunity cost, and then take off interest to get down to 5 to 10% profitability, or the EBT ratio. Something to note here, we still seem to be chasing the same margin, even though the costs and the revenue have gone up. So we just seem to be chasing that same margin, but the risk is a lot higher because of the cost increases. I want everyone to take these benchmarks with a grain of salt for 2022, because we are in a period of change and we will be likely in considerable uncertainty for another year or two. And figuring out what is the new normal is a real challenge. Okay, contingency planning. Another key piece is this what if, and the interest rates have been in the news the last week, but I've probably talked about increasing interest rates almost every year for the last 10 years, and how will that impact your farm? In this farm example here, we've got 300,000 of debt sitting at 4.5%. So what would a 2% interest rate increase do to profitability? When we do the numbers, 2% on 300,000 is only 6,000 of extra expense, but that's a 44% increase. And farms with more debt are going to be hit harder. 2% rate increase on an 85% equity farm will see an increased cost of about $14 an acre. And that is compared to a 65% equity farm that's going to see a $26 an acre cost increase, or nearly double the cost increase. It seems like no longer if this will happen, but when you listen to the news this week. And a couple of final thoughts here. I really want you to look at your farm and your numbers. And this is going to really help get you, in addition to the what got you here will not get you there. Your own numbers are going to be the way that you can get out of this. The push to expand farms never seems to stop, but the effort to get good before you get bigger can really help prevent small problems from becoming big ones. And finally, when you have no idea where to start increasing your profitability, look at the big numbers first on your farm, as those improvements can really add up. Again, 5% rule or the 2% rule to try to find those improvements can really add up and are well worth going after. And we are literally being forced to change what the farm management, with the cost increases, with the margin increases, with the interest rate increases, with the climate changes we seem to be under and going through. Okay, and the last thing is just a quick comment here. We have a couple other tools and resources on our webpage. We've got a new seeding rate calculator that actually Anne has helped with here over the last couple of months, and the updated custom rental and rate calculator is there for machinery cost. And our new agriculture department is going to leap into the new century by actually converting some of our Excel-based tools to HTML for the website. And hopefully we'll have that underway by spring that you should be able to check out. So with that, thank you very much. And feel free to get a hold of myself or Darren Bond if you do have any comments, questions, or concerns. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Roy. That was a great presentation. And I think we'll save all the questions for the last part of the session. So we'll move on to our farmer panelists. We have two panelists today, Larry Black and Alex Boersch. So Larry is a third-generation organic farmer. In 1978, he and his wife bought their own half-section farm in the Turtle Mountains, southwest of Deloraine. They transitioned their mixed operation to dairy and organic grain in 1982, and Larry is a past MOA board member. The other panelist we have today is Alex, who farms with his family in and around Eli. He has a master's degree in agriculture, and he tries to use as much diversity through intercropping, cover cropping, and alternative fertilizers to improve their land and crops. He's also the Canadian distributor for Hodson Bickler, which is an organic weed management machinery, and he sells organic and regenerative fertilizers, biologicals, and biostimulants. And he's also been on MOA's board of directors since 2020. So thanks for joining us today, Larry and Alex. So to start off this portion of the panel, I'm just going to be asking the panelists some questions about their cost of production and how they factor that into their systems. So the first question I have is, if you use the provincial cost of production guides, the ones that that Roy and his team have developed, so do you use those guides as a template to establish your cost of production? And if not, are there guides that you would recommend? So, are you using spreadsheets or other sort of software to calculate those costs? So I guess first I'll go to Alex to answer that question.
Sure. Thanks, Anne. Yeah, I guess I'll just share my screen here. Not sure where my presentation just went. Sorry, 1 second. My bad. The PowerPoint presentation seems to have disappeared, but I'll pull it up again. Oh, here we go. We kind of loosely have used the guides from the province in the past, but really we've just broken it down into calculating net profit per crop over the last few I guess 10 years, and really taking into account pretty conservatively, like aggressively on our costs and conservatively on some of our yields and pricing for each crop, and kind of spread out our fixed costs across the whole farm, including some of our green manure years. Basically this is a kind of a summary of what I would use. And I really think it's important that everyone breaks down each crop into really a net margin, really taking into account every cost possible, from cleaning equipment, cleaning time, paying yourself, I think all of that is extremely important. I'm not sure if you would have any questions based off of this, but I think it's very reflective of what Larry's presentation kind of showed. It with spring wheat, oats, and hemp really being drivers for next year, and but costs also really coming up, like some of our wages, we've kind of upped some of our interest rates in anticipation, fuel, equipment, everything has gone up by a minimum of 30% from last year. And it's a little bit scary going into next year, but it looks like we at least have fairly good prices finally going into organic that we can fix for next year. And now it's just going to be a difficult decision for us deciding what percentage of next year's crop we want to fix pricing for, with the risk that it could also go down.
Thanks, Alex. I think that's, you know, it's nice to see what other people are using. And I know, you know, every farmer has their own system. So maybe for this panel, if someone does have a question or wants more clarification, it might be easy just to raise your hand during the panelist questions, since it's, you know, fresh in everyone's mind. But Larry, are you able to let us know if you're, if you use that Manitoba guide as a template, or what sort of system you're using to measure cost of production?
There, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, just based on what I saw Roy's presentation, I'm a little old school, I guess. I'll just go through a little bit of what I prepared here. I've never had a written out budget since I started farming, or I've ever done a cost reduction estimate. We started farming with very little money, and we were forced to be extremely frugal to be able to stay in business. So, give you an example, first year we grossed $12,000, second year 14,000, and third year was 18,000 gross. We had to pay all of our expenses and raise a family with that. So, give you some sense of where we started. From there, from after the third year, which I guess was 1980, we started preparing to become dairy producers. So at that point, we started increasing our income significantly. We've done an estimate on our current COP, and I was quite surprised how much it added up to. Our philosophy has always been to be careful and to be able to distinguish between want and need. So I haven't got any written presentation here to screen share, but I'll just throw some numbers out there. What I took into consideration, rent or taxes, I guess the rent's roughly $50 an acre. My taxes would be equivalent to 10. And fuel is in that $40 an acre range. And just to, we looked at the last 2 years of our costs and averaged them to, and we did it over 900 acres that we manage. And we currently crop approximately 450 acres. And we have 2 families living off of this too, by the way. We have cattle as well. So the seed I estimated to be around $35 an acre. Part of that is historically, and part of it is looking at what the future costs are going to be. We use the only off-farm input that we have is from Overton Environmental out of Winnipeg, and that runs at about $10 an acre, and I'll expand on that a little bit later. Maintenance repairs, approximately $40 an acre. Depreciation, 15. Capital purchase costs for replacing equipment, $35, and living costs I have in there at 50, for a total of around $275. And that's about more than double what I thought it was going to be just off the top of my head before I actually put pen to paper. These costs have very little impact on our future cropping or present cropping decisions. We maintain a good viable rotation, and that looks after our nutrient requirements, and that is a much bigger concern to us.
Thanks, Larry. That was great. It is interesting, yeah, thinking about yeah, what you expect costs to be versus penciling them out. And I think looking at that, the spreadsheets that Manitoba Agriculture puts together, it can be a little overwhelming sometimes just because of that big breakdown of all the costs. And yeah, definitely add up there. And I think Alex answered this question about green manure. So the next question would be, if you green manure, how do you factor that cost into your cash crop years? And Alex answered that that was something that they spread out over their acres. And Larry, do you use green manures? And if so, how do you calculate that cost into your cropping years?
Yeah, our green manure is red clover most often. Pasture breaking or alfalfa breaking would factor into that as options, I guess. And we have approximately 1/3 of our broken acres on any given year in red clover. We sow it at approximately 6 pounds per acre at a cost of $3 per pound, for a total of $18 an acre. And I use an ATV with a broadcaster that holds approximately 50 pounds. And I travel at 20 miles an hour, 20 to 25 feet width. So it's very economical seeding for that. And we always use a nurse crop with the clover, and it's usually oats.
So after you're seeding the, sorry, so I'll ask this question. When you're seeding your red clover with your ATV, are you harrowing it in after, or just letting it sit on the surface?
Yes, we always harrow. Like, we would sow our oats to whatever depth makes sense, and then we would broadcast after that, like right after that, within a day, and then we would harrow it in after that.
Thanks. Sorry, I can't help asking an agronomy question. I realize that's off topic, but the next question here we have for the panel, maybe Larry, we'll start with you since you're unmuted now, is what advice do you have for farmers who are thinking about or in the process of transitioning to organic when it comes to thinking through costs of production? Like, if you know someone that's a conventional farmer that's thinking about transitioning, would you have some specific advice for them?
Okay. I guess I would say to them, remember that premiums are not always high and that there are cycles, and it's a niche market and it can be upset from time to time. So people who are looking at transitioning, make sure you don't put your budget to where the premium is extremely high, because it's not always going to stay there. Second thing would be pay attention to your soil health. That's really a necessary thing. Overton or environmental, I mentioned that earlier, and put a little plug in for them, I guess. It's a biological enhancement / inoculant, and it's out of Winnipeg, and telephone number for that is 417-4122, or his cell is 612-8121. And he's a very approachable man. Dale Overton is the guy's name, and the cost for that, I think I mentioned in my cost of production, is approximately $10 an acre, and it's a seed treatment that we mix up, and we put it into the auger as we're filling the seeder, and it has a adhering product in there that makes it stick to your seed. And he does have other products as well, but that's the only one that we're currently using. And we're finding we went this direction because we were having some disease issues a few years back, and we started out using a product out of Saskatchewan, and it was a little more money, and we had to use a sprayer to put it on the soil. And this way here, we don't need a sprayer. And we've never had a disease issue. I wouldn't say never. We had a little bit the year before, because we had an oat variety that had low disease resistance, And so I guess that's another thing I'll throw in there, that when you're choosing your seed, I would highly recommend that you look for disease resistance as part of your selection process. But so anyway, I would recommend that that they consult with Dale Overton on what might work for them. And third thing is your crops can compete with weeds if you manage it properly, and it helps to have a little luck too. But timing is everything with referring to cultivating and seeding. So that's the kind of thing you want to educate yourself on, I guess, in terms of when's the proper time to do those two things. So that's about all I have for that.
Thanks, Larry. And
Yeah.
Alex, are you able to let us know what your advice would be for new to
Yeah,
organic farms?
like in terms of cost production, I think there's a couple different ways of looking at it. So I would say that for organic, number one thing, if you're looking to transition, is do you have either animals, so a manure source, or do you have something like compost, some sort of a high nutrient source, because it's going to push yield. It makes it a lot more sustainable. And I think in the long run, it helps either reduce the amount of green manure years you need, or it justifies the green manure years. I think that's huge from a cost of production standpoint. And that's something that everyone absolutely needs to integrate into their cost structure. And then the other thing is there's two approaches. I think there's a low cost approach where it's all about seed timing and getting ahead of the weeds and using cheaper, older equipment. Or there's a high cost approach, which we use, which is probably a little riskier, but from a crop production standpoint, like I think it keeps our yields higher. But then you have to go all out and be prepared to spend on interrow cultivators, harrows, all of that. There's a lot more equipment and a lot more hours. Like we probably spend triple the hours of labor per acre. And we probably have about 30% higher equipment costs than we would have in conventional. 30 to 50%, I would say. And that really helps us push our rotations longer without having as many green manures, probably be able to push it to 1 in 5 years when we combine it with compost. And that really pushes the profitability higher, but upfront costs are quite high. So I would say, like Larry said, don't always bank on the high premiums, because it took about 1.5 years for the organic prices to catch up to the conventional prices now. And then, yeah, I would say there's like two approaches, but you do need, in my opinion, some sort of a manure or compost source to really sustainably push yields over the long term.
Thanks, that's good advice from both people. And it's oh, I have Karen has her hand up here.
Hi, I just wanted to ask Alex a question just around that high cost approach for machinery. Have you calculated for the equipment purchases that you've recently done, what the return on investment, like how many years will it take for that to even out a little bit in your cost of production spreadsheets?
So it kind of depends. I'll show you something quickly here on, I'll just share my screen again. So this is from, these are just some typical, this is, for example, when we were justifying buying our first tine weeder for our farm, which is probably the cheapest out of all of the weed management tools. But just for an example, we took Scott Shirtliff's, Professor Shirtliff's study out of the U of S, and kind of where they had with proper in-crop weed management, I think they had an average of almost 50% higher yields. But we conservatively dumbed that down to, we went a little bit more into detail, and there were certain scenarios where it was about 13%. So in that scenario, for example, for us, well, we plugged in 13% with some pretty conservative prices, a 13% yield increase. Well, on a harrow, you pretty much pay for it under any scenario in 1 year. Now other ones are more complicated, like, for example, buying a compost spreader and purchasing compost and putting it on probably costs us $90 an acre to put 3 tons on. It gives us probably 40 pounds of phosphate, 45 pounds of nitrogen, a couple hundred pounds of calcium, et cetera, a bunch of organic matter, but it's not as immediate, the release of nutrients, things like that. So it's going to be, from talking to people, more like a 3-year process. So for some of those, it's a little bit more complicated. How do you directly input your benefit out of those? But overall, that's basically what we're using, is as many studies as we can find to see what kind of the averages are. And then some of it you just have to figure out on your own farm, I guess, and hope that it works. But that's kind of been our approach.
Thanks. That's a great example for people to see. And yeah, it's nice to see how detailed that was. And did that come from Steve Shirtliff, or did you come up with that spreadsheet on your own?
The spreadsheet itself, I came up with on my own, just with the cost of the harrow and then what that yield increase was. But the actual yield increases, that was like the minimum yield increase from harrowing in his study that he did. I believe it was on oats and on lentils, and I can't remember what the other crop was. But yeah, that's basically how we figured it out. So just the yield increase percentage came from his study.
Thanks, that's very interesting. So if there's no more questions right now for the 2 panelists, we will come back to the panelists, but first we are going to, we'll have some more panelist questions in about 15 minutes, but first we're having Craig Klemmer from FCC to be talking on interest rates and risk management on organic farms. So Craig has been with FCC since 2009 and is a principal agricultural economist with experience in agricultural markets and risks. He specializes in monitoring and analyzing this macroeconomic environment, modeling industry health, and providing industry risk analysis. So Craig is a regular contributor to the FCC economics blog, and he has a master's degree in agricultural economics from the University of Saskatchewan. So we'll invite
thanks, Anne, for having
Craig
me.
to share his screen.
Hey, you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, I will share my screen right away here and get things moving along. So I was asked to talk about interest rates and kind of how the markets are evolving and what we're seeing there. And when it comes to the markets, can you guys see my screen okay? Hopefully it's showing up. I feel like, can you see my presentation?
Yeah,
perfect. Okay, perfect. So anyways, when it comes to the markets and so many of the prices and things that you're talking about in the cost of production, it's really interesting. The major challenge that we have here in agriculture is that we're price takers on almost everything. When we look at what costs we get to really control, you're talking about maybe your labor market and what you're willing to take return on your management, what you're willing to pay yourself or family members for the job. There's a little bit, but not a lot of, control in land price. We do have domestic and regional land markets, but most of the other things are coming from outside, whether it's equipment, whether it's other kind of crop inputs. And those are so many challenges. I'm going to talk about interest rates. And, when we think about the story of interest rates, it's quite large. And there's a lot of things that I think people need to be considering as they try to make the decisions that they think are the most beneficial. And obviously interest rates and macro things such as the Canadian dollar are well well outside of our reach. But there are some things that I think are important to monitor or keep an eye on as you're making some of these short and long-term investments about what's right for your operation. So I really enjoyed the conversation so far and the discussion here. So somehow I lost my ability to see the team's part, but if we look at where Canada's economy is going, I think one thing that's really interesting is that we hear all these good news about how quickly the Canadian economy is growing. That being said, you know, arguably we've actually been underperforming. You know, if we look at the beginning of last year, you know, the expectation was that the Canadian economy would grow around 6.5% in 2021, and we ended up coming in about, you know, 5.5, mid five, somewhere in there. And, you know, quite a bit slower than what was originally, you know, forecasted. So you think about things like Omicron, we had Delta variant, so, you know, stopping and starting of the economy, you know, restaurants open and service industry open and then contracting. So there's been a lot of disruptions in it. And as a result, we have seen the economy not perform quite as well as what we originally would have thought. Other things that we think about and happening in the Canadian economy, inflation is hot, and that's a big part of the story that we need to chat about. The labor market has been recovering, and it's extremely strong right now, depending on which region of Canada you are. But, you know, arguably we're up at that, you know, full employment. And then we got these supply chain disruptions, and all of this stuff is coming into play when they start talking about interest rates, cost of funds, and where we see things evolving. So I know Roy shared that, you know, we've been talking about increases in interest rates for the last number of years, and yet they haven't seemed to materialize. And that's been one of the challenges. Right now, you know, I think the momentum is there. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And then the question is by how much, over what period of time. So, you know, if we look at just kind of taking a quick snapshot of inflation, because, you know, inflation is what is a major driver of interest rates. The Bank of Canada just renewed their commitment that they were going to control inflation around 2%. So you kind of have that target. And, you know, they've layered on a few other things in terms of maximizing employment. And that's kind of drifting similar to where the US is about, you know, maximizing employment, maximizing overall growth. But, you know, the target is still in inflation control, averaging 2%, a low of 1% and a high of 2%. What's really interesting, though, is if we kind of look at the storyline and where we're going and kind of how things are moving forward here. You know, we just yesterday got the most recent inflationary numbers. Inflation was 4.8%, you know, 1.1% higher than the previous month, and, you know, well beyond that overall inflation target of between 1% and 3%. And, you know, as a result, there's been more and more calls that the Bank of Canada starts increasing interest rates and moving that higher. I want to put in a couple other parts of the story that I think are really interesting to consider. Because, you know, if we look at how things evolved and where things are, you know, kind of coming into 2020, we saw some deflationary pressures overall in Canada. And, you know, if we look at, you know, the cost of food, and we look at, well, not so much food, if we look at the cost of goods that were coming into Canada, the impact, the original impact and shock of the pandemic, nobody really knew what was going to happen. People started working from home, demand for energy declined significantly. So that saw oil prices come down quite sharply. But what is all important is in the beginning part of 2020, we actually saw this deflationary pressure coming into play. And, you know, that kind of went through, and you can see even by this chart that deflationary pressure really carried through until February of 2021. And, you know, since 2021, or since February 2021, we started to see this building up of higher inflationary pressures. But why this is really important. When they measure inflation, they're using this month a year ago. So what they're measuring is what were the prices of goods, or what was the prices of products at December 30th or 31st in 2020 compared to prices in December of 2021. And right now we see that they're 4.8% higher. But if you compare it to how they've changed, you know, in December 2021 to how they were in December 2020, 2019, you actually see that spread isn't as great, because you know, you would have been looking for growth of 4% or 2% per year kind of compounded there, and you didn't, you know, it's not quite as strong as what, you know, the numbers look at. So you know, we kind of have a bit more of a balanced story than what is in the news. And that's why the Bank of Canada hasn't been as quick to react. So I don't want to say that the impact of inflation is not pressuring families, because absolutely that is. And if you're going to the grocery store yourself and you're looking at purchasing food right now, you know, obviously it's impacting the pocketbooks of all Canadians. But when we look at that inflationary story and in terms of how the Bank of Canada mandate is, there's not quite as much pressure as maybe what we'd see. That being said, as we get through this 4.8%, as we continue to work through those periods of low inflation in 2020 and 2021, there's going to be more and more, pressure for it. And where we see this inflationary pressure isn't from the traditional sources in the same way. If I want to kind of, building the story and where we see things are going, what we did see last year, and oil and energy prices are such a big part of that story in terms of inflationary pressures. But if we look at where we were in 2020, we saw this sharp running up of natural gas prices. We saw a big increase in oil prices, a doubling through 2021. And then we started to see those things ease off. And if we look at, in December, we actually saw prices of fuel decline by 4%. And you see some of those, inflationary pressures starting to ease slightly. Now, with more disruptions, and it looks like the U.S. economy is going back up, we've seen oil prices rebound, and we're now trading in that 80 cents or $80 barrel mark again. We're going to continue to see that contribute to higher inflationary pressures and push that through. The other thing that I think is so important that we look at on inflation and kind of where interest rates are going is what's happening on the labor markets. And if you look at where we are right now, unemployment in Canada at November, and we'll get to December numbers here fairly soon, we were at 6%. If you look at Manitoba specifically, 5.1%. This is really, really strong numbers. If we look at participation rates, they've actually increased quite significantly. If you have an unemployment rate of around that 5.5%, even 6%, they consider that we're at full employment, which means anybody that's looking for a job in Canada or in a province is able to find a job fairly easily. And, we're seeing that overall cost of labor going up. Hours worked, full-time employment is increasing. So we're seeing some fairly good strength in the labor market. And this is creating more and more challenges. And why this is important is as we continue to see wage inflations and we keep seeing companies paying more for labor and disruptions in the labor market, it's going to contribute to more and more inflationary pressures. And we're seeing this as a major cost when we start talking to a number of our customers that labor is one of their top concerns right now. And now when you have COVID right now and Omicron coming in, keeping enough people around to manufacture the products, whether it's food or other products, is a major challenge. So that's just raising that cost where, we don't have enough employees showing up just because of self-isolation and quarantine kind of periods that people are looking at because they've had close contact or because they've been exposed to COVID. So one of the major challenges that keeps moving through is labor, and we continue to see some labor pressures putting some upward pressure on inflation and moving things forward there. I'll talk about supply chains in a little bit because it's a bit of a separate story, but that's also contributing to inflation. What this all means and how does this all come into play is really in the bond yields. When we look at overall interest rates, we want to look at two pieces. First of all, what is the Bank of Canada doing? And that's really driving that short-term rates. It's the overnight rate, and that's what they're using to try to control inflation. So right now we're at 25 basis points or 0.25%. We're starting to see market expectations even tomorrow that we'd see our first rate increase of 25 basis points up to 0.5%. We'll see, there's more and more reasons that could happen. Originally, we were thinking that this wouldn't happen until March time period, but we're seeing more pressure to move that up forward. Why this is important, though, is another part is that you look at is the bond markets, because when you're looking at purchasing equipment or you're making a longer term investments like land or buildings or the house, you're looking more at fixed rate products and how is the price of money for 5, 7, 10-year money out there, and how is that changing? So what we look at there is the bond market. I'm bringing this together. So what I'm showing here is actually the bond prices currently. So if we look at as of January 5th and kind of this more recent time period, we look at 2020, so that light blue line, and then I looked at kind of prior to the pandemic, and then we look at where we are in the middle of the pandemic, and that's that light blue line at the bottom. What you do see, though, is short-term money still remains quite cheap, this 1-2 month money, and we're starting to see upward pressure on 6-month money. So what this means is that the markets are seeing and predicting that we're going to see some fairly strong growth in interest rates, and they're going to come on fairly aggressively. So we're actually seeing that yield curve, the price of money, increasing fairly quickly. It's still very cheap compared to where we were pre-pandemic, but rising up fairly quickly. And what we do see is that we're starting, as we continue to see closer to the interest rate increases, these yield curves are going to price in more and more. And what we see right now is the yield curves are starting to price in 5 or 6 rate increases through this year, through 2022. It's a good story. I'm a little bit more pessimistic on that. If I look at our past performance, when Canada's increased rates that aggressively, and if we increase rates quicker than the United States, it tends to stall out our economy. So what I would be looking for, maybe, I don't know if we'll see 6, I would see, expect to maybe see 4 rate increases here in 2022. The first one could happen right now. We could see a couple really quick increases trying to control that inflationary story and try to, empower the consumer a little bit more and make sure that we continue to promote strong labor market, lower inflation, and maximizing the overall Canadian economy and that growth. So what does this really look like in terms of your costs right now? If we look at borrowing costs, and this is just an average business borrowing cost over time, it looks at fixed and variable rate products combined and adding them together from the Bank of Canada. And what you can see, even as we see these rate increases, where we are right now, we've seen some upward pressure on rate increases in 2021. And as we get into 2022 and we see these rate increases occur and come into play, we're going to see this stuff push up higher. That being said, if we look at where we are right now and how this compares to where we were historically, we're almost a full 100 basis points below where we were in January 2019. And we did see some rate declines there. So, historically, from an interest rate cost side of things, money's still going to remain historically cheap. The Bank of Canada and markets are going to be looking for us to get 8 rate increases over the next couple of years, and that kind of gets you to this long-term equilibrium, and there's probably going to be more and more push for that. But that's 200 basis points over a 2-year or possibly 2.5-year period if the Canadian economy can keep growing, if we don't see more and more disruptions from COVID and different variants coming through, and we do see this reopening of the Canadian and global economies to help to see that growth. So those are things that we're going to have to be monitoring. Another place where this all comes into play, and I'm probably running out of time here, is really on the strength of the dollar. And that's going to be something that's really important, because one of the things that we think about inflation and interest rates is they're very much linked to the value of the Canadian dollar. If Canada is going to raise rates quicker than the United States, it's going to make our dollar stronger relative to the US. As we see the US kind of increase rates quicker than Canada, or at least lockstep with Canada, we're going to see that dollar remain slightly weaker than the US. The other piece that we need to monitor is oil. And as much as we don't want it to be, we are still very much an oil currency or a petrocurrency. As the price of oil continues to hover around 80 cents, it's going to continue to put strength behind the dollar. We would expect that over time, maybe by the end of this year, just as production increases, we'd probably see that dollar or oil prices average around that $65 to $70 a barrel. And that should put a little bit of downward pressure on the Canadian dollar and make imports a little bit more affordable. I talked a little bit about supply chain disruption. I just want to show a couple quick slides here, because I think it has a big impact, and specifically when we start talking about movement and export opportunities. And freight and containers would be one of those big pieces that I think are so important. We've seen a doubling of container price costs, and we don't have great data out of Canada, but if you look at that Los Angeles to Shanghai price of containers, they've doubled. And we're starting to see some easing in global freight prices minorly, but you know, when it comes to containers specifically, which more and more of the organic crops are moving in, we still see that price pressure. So if your product's going into that export markets and moving through containers, we're going to continue to see these high freight costs pushing down on those opportunities for your products, and creating some uncertainty. And that's just these challenges of the market that we're in. I mentioned that we also had, you know, looking at, you know, ocean bulk freight costs, Canada and that were a little bit more comparative. They've actually tripled. If we look at the bulk to index that combines all these different things, we're starting to see that coming down and even out a little bit. And I think one of the bigger threats that we're seeing right now and going to continue to disrupt things is just the availability of truckers. So, you know, this is a story that's building up, but you know, we've have in Manitoba specifically, I think you're short about 5,000 truckers right now, just to meet current and expanding demand for truckers in Manitoba. And then you layer on top of this the vaccine requirements and that coming through, and those are, you know, just creating more and more challenges for the sector. So with that, maybe I'll stop. I know we're running out of time, but if there's some questions, I'd be more than happy to answer some of those when the time comes.
Great, thanks, Craig. I don't see any hands up right now, and I think we'll move on to a couple more questions to the farmer panelists, and then we'll have general Q&A from the audience. So if anyone has any questions, or we can answer them then. Oh, Alex has his hand up, so maybe this is a good time to ask a question.
Yeah, I just had a question in regards to agriculture. It seems that inflation is higher in agriculture even than in some of the mainstream, I guess, society inflation, especially on equipment, fertilizer, all those kind of things. Do you think that's going to continue to be an issue in agriculture? And then also, do you think it's worth locking in long-term rates? There's probably like a 1.5% spread between like a 1 year and a 10-year that FCC would offer. Do you think it's worth it for the peace of mind right now to be thinking about locking that in as a farmer?
Okay, so let's on the inflation side of things, if we look at agriculture products, yes, things have been a lot, you know, we've seen more and more inflationary pressures than we have in other sectors. You know, if we look at, you know, fertilizer prices, I think is one of the, and, you know, chemicals are we seeing some of the biggest inflationary pressures. There's a few things coming into play there. You know, we're seeing natural gas prices in Europe, they increased 5-fold. There's been disputes between Europe and Russia, and obviously you read that in the news right now, some ongoing disputes with Ukraine and where everybody's playing in there. So the reality is that fertilizer production into Europe is basically shut down, or a lot of it has stopped producing. So that reduced overall global supply of nitrogen by about 10%, just with those plant closures. You also had a similar, you know, in China, they exported quite a bit of fertilizer at the beginning or last year. And if you actually looked at fertilizer prices last year and crop input prices, they had declined going into, or were softening going into last year, and actually made, you know, if you're competing against your conventional crop counterparts, they had really good profitability because they had lower crop input prices last year and on the price rally. But China has now put export bans on fertilizer. So that accounts for another 10% of global fertilizer availability. So you essentially lost 20% of this global availability of fertilizer coming into this current crop year. Layer on top of that, with the Olympics happening in Beijing or in China, they've actually reduced a lot of the heavy pollutant industries. So, you know, many of the crop inputs, a lot of the active ingredient type of things have been minimized right now. So those will probably get fired up back after the Olympics when they're, you know, it's a little less about the show. So, you know, for this current crop year, you know, we're not seeing a big change on that inflationary pressure for planting prices. You know, we see crop input prices remaining high across the board. On the other side, you know, the other story that we saw quite a bit and saw some challenges even in our portfolio is that a number of our clients that were exporting and using containers there, they got, prices just escalated significantly. So, what would have cost, they doubled in price of the container. That caused major disruptions. They actually ended up eating the cost on some of those because they'd priced the product in whatever market was and trying to move on container, whether it was trucks, train, or ocean freight costs. Those container availability as well as movement increased significantly. So, we're just overall, we've been seeing some big pressure on that. On the equipment side of things, so, just like automobiles, I don't think equipment's been much different on there. Chip availability has been a major problem. Labor was a really big challenge. John Deere just signed, I don't know if you guys watched that, but John Deere strike in the US, they signed a huge contract where they're looking at 10% wage increases. That's going to fall on you in terms of buying new equipment, but it's not just the new equipment that's being pressured, because we've taken out this availability and the excess supply of used equipment right now. And even talking to Ritchie Brothers and that, the amount of equipment that's used that are turning through either the auction marts or through the dealerships has depleted significantly. So finding good used equipment is becoming a lot harder right now. So those are all things that have created a lot more inflationary pressure for agriculture as opposed to other parts of the economy. The second question about would I lock in? In terms of when you're going to lock in, as inflationary pressures, I mean, if you believe that inflationary pressures are going to increase, and that 50 basis point thing is going to be the part that you're the most worried about, then absolutely it's a good decision. The reality that we're here over the, if we look at what's happened with COVID, we've seen a whole bunch of starting and stopping of the Canadian economy. So, we're optimistic that things are going to recover. Omicron seems to be less severe than, say the Delta variant. So, we're seeing more and more traction in the US and Canada that we'll see an acceleration through. If you're a betting person and you think that we're going to see more market closures, more shutdowns and kind of consuming that, then the rate increase probably isn't going to be as great as expected. For myself personally, I think it makes sense to lock some stuff in for peace of mind, security. I can price that in and I know where I am. So I think it makes sense to do it on a portion on some of the longer term stuff. But still, you're paying a 1% in premium right now, often for locking in. So, if you're paying things down quicker, things are looking good. I still think it makes sense to have a combination of products, to be honest.
Thanks, that was great. And I have one other question here from Royden, if he wants to unmute himself.
Yeah, hey, thanks for that. Very interesting. I'm wondering, do you have a tab on how all these numbers affect organic agriculture as opposed to conventional agriculture? I was just thinking, for example, the freight rates, if they've been tripled, like organic, a lot of organic is consumed in North America rather than exported. In fact, if there's a potential factor, it could be that the downward pressure on organic prices are often based on what can be imported into Canada rather than what's exported. So I was just wondering whether you had a comment.
Yeah, so it's going to be, we're going to see a bunch of different things come into play. So when it comes to organic and we look at shipping, absolutely. When we're looking at more of these domestic challenges and moving products throughout North America. The ability to bring in product from, global partners is going to be more and more of a challenge. I would say that, with the organic side of things, bringing products and the movement between North America and Europe is easing up quicker than the North America to Asia routes, because Canadians are demanding more goods just in general, and it's filling up the ports across the board there. So we are seeing some easing of price and availability of that Europe, North America routes more so than Asia, North America. The trucker thing is real, and it's going to be a major problem. It doesn't matter what industry you're going to be a part of. So if you're looking to be moving things by semi, it is going to be a major problem where we're talking, like I said, we're dealing with a 5,000 trucker shortage, I believe, just in Manitoba. we're talking hundreds of thousands of truckers shortage in North America when we think of Canada, the United States. So, you know, that cost of trucking is likely going to see upward pressure. It's the, you know, trucking is the #1 employer of males in North America. It's the biggest employment sector. So when we see this availability, it is going to be a major challenge, and there's just no way around it. So there's not going to be a competitive advantage or disadvantage to the organic sector. It's just something you're going to have to deal with, and availability of the supply. You know, other things that are going to come into play. I mean, the trade dispute on the border, you know, on vaccine requirements. I hope that's temporarily, and we're actually working on you know, either the industry being vaccinated or whatever that looks like, because that's just going to be an annoyance for the sector overall. The one thing that you're going to see though, and I guess I just put a challenge on it, we're going to see these markets shift a lot right now in organic versus conventional, and we're probably going to see some disruptions in the relationships of some products right now. And one of the big things that you're seeing is the food versus fuel debate kicking up in a big way again. And that's going to change, you know, how the industries and agriculture look holistically. And I don't know how that's all going to play out. We've seen major investments in some food, in processing, and most of that is going into fuel. So we're almost getting into this disruption, similar to like the ethanol disruption we saw in 07, 08, playing through, except on the oilseed piece with biofuels and how that's going to play through. But I think it's something to be cognizant of when you talk about premiums over one product versus another, and how that relationship's going to play, and the markets that the organic products are going to go into. Food still has to be #1 in terms of where products are going, but we're going to see a lot of disruption and change, I think, over the next year or two on that.
Great, thanks. Well, I have a couple more questions for Larry and Alex here. But if anyone else has questions after those farmer panelist questions, we'll look forward to taking those. So I guess we'll first go to Alex. So the question I have here is, how much do market prices influence your cost of production decisions? So examples would be, if crop A looks good in terms of market price, would you spend more on inputs? So maybe hauling compost a longer distance, or putting more compost on, perhaps buying cleaning equipment to get a better sample?
I would say that it does to a certain extent. Definitely on the compost side, like for example, next year hemp looks extremely profitable at over $2 a pound clean, and it needs more nutrients. So it depends a little bit on our rotation, but in that sense, yes, where I can actually lock in a price, I will definitely spend more if I think I can get a return on investment, and if it helps me reduce the amount of green manure years I need. Yeah, so I guess it's more what's our potential margin rather than our cost of production that drives what we'll invest. Other than that, yeah, I think that would be the most important driver, there's no doubt. But then we still need to keep a certain rotation, so yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like when looking at, say, Roy's spreadsheet, you see some of those crops being profitable, others maybe that people have planned for the rotation being less profitable. So it is, always a balancing act to see how much you should put into the actual profitability versus changing your rotation. And hopefully people aren't going too far out of their planned rotation just due to profitability of specific crops, which is, obviously tougher in organic crop production versus conventional.
Yeah, that and
Larry, do you have, oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say the other thing is weed control. Like, I think that like future loss of income by growing stuff like flax too, that's looks extremely profitable, but you're gonna compromise on weed control. And those are like things that we're weighing up heavily right now that are really tough decisions, because you don't know how that will affect you 2 or 3 years down the road.
Yeah, definitely a lot of factors going into every cropping decision. And I know, you know, it also depends a bit on equipment, like what equipment do you have for weed control? And, you know, the dry years in the last couple of years probably have made us maybe a bit more confident with weed control than we should be. So, yeah, a lot of factors. Larry, do you have any comments on how market prices influence your cost of production decisions?
Yeah, I guess my take on it would be market prices don't really have a large impact on our cropping decisions. We have three main crops that we grow, which is wheat, oats, and flax, and we have a lot of smaller stones, and we tend not to grow crops that require you cutting the crop too short. And you always have to be aware of the soil nutrient potential and also weed control, as Alex had mentioned. So we have like I said, the three crop rotations, and so right after your soil building year, which would be the clover that we do here, you have a higher nutrient availability. So then we choose crops that require higher nutrient, and so I think you're probably better off, in my mind, to choose what's going to grow well on that field, and maybe the price isn't quite as strong as the other, but you're going to make up for it with your yield and capitalize in that form. And one of the strategies that we have to combat that price thing is that we try to have a little extra bin space around, and then if you happen to have a crop price that's not keeping up, you just store that crop for a little longer until the price rebounds.
Thanks. Those are some good tips. And I do think, yeah, just in terms of comparing organic and conventional, that we do see organic rotations to be a bit more set, or farmers are maybe planning a bit further in the future. So I guess another question, we'll start with you, Larry, what are some ways that you use on your own farm to keep your costs low?
I guess we only use the one crop input, as I had mentioned before. We run older equipment to keep our costs low in that regard. On our soil building, which I mentioned before is clover, we have multiple uses for the clover, and we use it to reduce our winter forage costs, because we will harvest that clover on occasion if we need it to. And we also found out this last year, being as dry as it was, that we needed some additional pasture. So we used electric wire to, and rather than break the clover crop up when we normally would, we opted then to graze some of it. And so that turned out to be a really good choice. We were a little bit concerned about bloating, and so we watched them very carefully. And one of the strategies, if you're worried about bloating, is make sure you don't turn the cattle out on that crop when the cattle are hungry, because then they will tend to overeat, and then that would cause the problem. So we actually had no cases whatsoever of bloat on all of our grazing, and we did approximately 2 months of clover grazing, and we had no problem that way. So it makes it not really a cost, in our mind. The benefits that we get from clover being soil nutrient and winter augmentation of the feed supply and summer grazing. So it's really not a cost in our mind. I guess one other low cost strategy we have here is that when it comes, because we use older equipment, we have a little more maintenance costs maybe than what some would have. So we have a mechanic that lives out of town, and his cost per hour is roughly 60% of the local Rocky Mountain in town. So that really saves us a lot of money as well. And he's very good. He's international trained mechanic, and he's been always very good for us. That's about it for that.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks. Alex, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. Oh, unfortunately, I don't think we're a super low cost producer, but I guess something that at least myself, I'm lucky for is that I can share equipment. So my dad also has a conventional farm, so we share combines, and sometimes we share tractors back and forth, so we can amortize tractors over a lot more acres, things like that. It takes a little bit more with clean out procedures and kind of planning, harvest, and seeding and things like that. But yeah, if you could share equipment, I mean, there's a lot of models like that in Europe, even with just neighbors and stuff like that on equipment sharing. But other than that, we're trying to push our yields in the organic, so we haven't been lower cost so far, and higher seeding rates, especially in years like this where seed is a lot more expensive. It's hard to cut back on those things because you still want good weed control for the future, and prices are so good right now that I think it's worth trying to push for higher yields. But yeah, that's our opinion.
Thanks, Larry and Alex. Does anyone from the audience have any questions from the panelists or Craig or Roy? Okay, I have a question for Roy. In the first, in your presentation, you had a good slide on estimating organic crop benchmarks. So do you have some sort of document or an explainer on the website of how you would calculate this for your farm?
No,
I thought it was
not
like
yet.
a great slide. Okay.
Okay. We went through the exercise of doing it on the conventional side this year, and it seemed like it was a long, slow process to try to develop those benchmarks, work on the standardized operating statement, but it showed us the potential to do it. The challenge, though, is on those benchmarks, when you take a look historically at costs or revenues, to determine a benchmark, and then you come into, 2021 and into 22 with high prices, high cost, the old benchmarks chucked out the window. So you have to try to, again, establish a new benchmark. So to try to figure out where that is in terms of, those yields and prices, you're taking a guess and you're hoping a bit. You try to examine the costs and you try to come up with those things. But those key pieces that I talked about, knowing how, the yield, price, cost are going to come back to affecting directly on that gross margin. Realizing, when Alex was talking about, high fuel, high labor, well, that's a real thing. And that is something that organic farmers are going to have to watch even closer than conventional, on those direct operating expenses. We heard about machinery repairs. Well, those are quite real too, and have gone up a ton, with the price of parts, et cetera, as well as labor. And those are really hard to pin down to how they relate back to those benchmark numbers. So those are going to be a bit of a moving exercise for the next couple of years, but it's definitely on my radar to get that in there, so we can work on that and use that to help make decisions to select crops, find profitability and opportunities for sure.
Thanks. Yeah, I think like when I'm looking at information like that, it's sometimes a bit hard to make sense of it all. So it's nice to have someone explain it to you as well.
The copy of my slides are all on our website now too, by the way, in case anyone's interested. So I'd sent Catherine a link earlier, but it's live as of yesterday. So, the slides are there if people do want to pick through them and compare back to the COP that we've, got on the website as well.
Thanks, Ray. Are there any other questions from any of the speakers from this morning? So if not, I think we will take our lunch break. We're right on time for our morning session. So we'll do our lunch break now and we'll get started again at 1 p.m. And at that time, we'll be going over record keeping for organic farms. So yeah, everyone can take a break and we'll join you back here at 1 p.m. So thank you so much to our speakers from this morning. And I also wanted to thank our sponsors again, the Government of Canada and the Canadian Agriculture Partnership, the Prairie Organic Development Fund, Roquette Canada, and Sunrise Credit Union. And sorry, did someone have a question?
Not a question, I just had a bit of a note to make. It seems like our website is having a little trouble, so I'm going to post the agenda for the day in the chat along with some links for the cost share program, so you can take a look at stuff if you're interested and want to look at that. And we'll try and make sure things are up and running by today or tomorrow. Again, I'm not sure what's happening there, so I just wanted to flag that for everybody. So keep an eye on your chat box for some more info there, and I'll also include the link that Roy sent for his presentation. Okay. All right, then I guess everybody can go off and enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you back here in a little bit. And I'm going to pause the recording for now. Okay, so our second panel, keeping good records for organic farms, is made possible due to the generous contributions from Government of Canada and the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, from Prairie Organic Development Fund and their sponsors Grain Millers, the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security, and Prairie Heritage Seeds, and from Roquette. All right, thank you, sponsors, and I will hand this back over to Anne.
Thanks, Catherine. So the topic this afternoon is on organic record keeping, and our first panel is with organic certifiers and inspectors, where they will be sharing the good, the bad, and the great of record keeping on organic farms. So we have 3 people to be part of this panel. The first is Janine Gibson. So she has over 5,000 organic audits and 14 certifiers under her belt. Janine has experience with a wide variety of organic system plans and their record keeping, including her own permaculture co-op farm south of Steinbach. Janine is an accredited member of the International Organic Inspectors Association, where she serves as peer evaluator, trainer, and current board vice president. We also have Catherine Carroll, who's a certification specialist with Pro-Cert Organic Systems. She works with organic producers, gluten-free producers, aquaculture clients, and regenerative organic clients. She's been with Pro-Cert since February 2021, but has been a contract inspector and evaluator with them since 2014. And she has worked in the organic industry since 2007. The third panelist we have is Tiffany Priestley, who works with OPAM, Organic Producers Association of Manitoba. Tiffany lives in Minnesota, Manitoba with her husband and their 2 daughters. They live in the country and strive to instill in their girls the joy of farm living and the responsibility we all share in ensuring our land is healthy and viable for generations to come. She began her career with the Organic Producers Association of Manitoba in 2008 and has been there as the certifying agent ever since. OPAM's mission is to be a farmer-led organization that advances organic agriculture by growing and supporting a vibrant and viable community. So thank you to all of the panelists that we have for this afternoon. So I have some questions for each of the panelists, and I believe some presentations, they will have some presentations as well. So the first question is for Janine. Can you identify some patterns across the farms you visited, and what are some areas that farmers typically struggle with in terms of their inspections? And I think Catherine is going to be pulling up Janine's slides here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anne. And thanks to all who've contributed to this, because of course we know that business thinking and systems thinking are a little bit of a shift when it comes to organics. And that's what I wanted to start with, is that we have a standard. I wanted to make sure everybody on the call understands the section 4 primarily, which is what I don't see it yet. Are you going to put the slides up? Because what I've seen is people that haven't actually made the leap from cost, like just a strictly cost benefit analysis kind of thinking, to the systems thinking. That is important. And we always start with our principles first. And this is one of the reasons when we were writing the standard, we didn't have a very narrow prescriptive list of paperwork required. We made very general statements. We wanted to help to follow these principles. So the principle of care and in what we do, that we have the principle of ecology, that it's systems thinking, that we're not breaking our farms down, but that we need to look at all the different aspects of our cost of production, not just the dollar cost, but the costs of weed seeds in the soil. So it's broadening out the systems thinking. We could go to the next slide, please. So just wanting to make sure that we always start with that. So here's section 4, which clearly says that you have to have an organic plan, that you have to update it every year, that it has to describe what you're doing in your record keeping. And I think one of the most common mistakes that I see is people not designing the record keeping around the tools they're already using. So if you're using a particular software spreadsheet, that your record keeping fit with that so that you're not duplicating. I've seen a lot of farmers really duplicating efforts. So that's one of the most common mistakes, is not developing a systems thinking that in their approach to record keeping that allows them to calculate their cost of production and to do accurate cost benefit analyses. So if we could just move to the next slide, so that we've got this organic plan that's described and we have to have records sufficient. And here's all the details in 4.4.1. And you see they're still very general, just so that it maintains the organic integrity of products and fully discloses everything that comes in and moves out. But that doesn't really help the operator understand that they have to be able to do an accurate cost benefit analysis and come up with their cost of production so they will truly be resilient and sustainable in the face of our, mitigating extreme weather events and things of this nature. So hopefully you see how this is my answer to a pretty complex question. Could go to the next slide. I think basically there's just 2 more slides. The records make it possible to track everything moving in and off. And then the next one, I think there are some more specifics we've added. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the identification system for everything, that's your lot numbering system. Risk management for GE, that has to be detailed as well. So it's just like good luck with these basic principles into your design. But mostly I see not taking a systems thinking and not having the details so that you can do an accurate cost of production. Thanks.
Thanks, Janine. When you're speaking about duplicating efforts in record keeping, are you referring to maybe having like a different system for keeping track of your, all your field operations and your clean out records versus, I don't know, a different system for your expenses and your
I see a lot of guys keeping a little notebook or in their pocket, and then they feel like they have to come home and transcribe it into a computerized system. And so if they're, hopefully the younger ones now are entering the data on their phone, and they have the software programs on their phone so they can enter it directly. But that's what I was seeing in terms of duplication is some of the old school guys keeping it all in a hand thing, and then feeling like they needed to type it all out or delegate it to their partner to type it all out. And that's just such a duplication of time and effort. If there could be software systems that are right on their handheld devices now, so they can not duplicate that effort.
All right, thank you. The next question is for Tiffany and Catherine. So we'll maybe start with Tiffany for this answer. So from a certified perspective, what records do you request from farmers most often because they're incomplete or unclear? And the second part of that is, where do operations typically seem to struggle? And what advice do you have for them?
Thank you. So I referenced with Linda today to try to go through and find some options. For this, when we get out of certification season and we get to the beginning, your mind kind of shuts off and you're like, oh, wait, what do I even ask clients for? What are they missing? So we did a little bit of brainstorming. And I think our biggest ones that we find are when our operators are don't understand our farm audit control sheets. So in turn, their sales from their previous harvest and then what they've harvested this year and where it belongs and why it's necessary. I think that's our biggest one, where we're always like, okay, can you send this back? Or they'll send in something, well, I grew this crop, that's great, but no one says a year. So you have no idea where it's referencing back to. So I think that's our biggest one. Bin records are an issue. Again, it's documenting the year things were harvested. So I've got, some people have up to 14, 15 bins and you're telling us what's in them, but you're not documenting what year they were from or that information. So we're constantly back and forth with that. And I mean, everybody's different. So there's always going to be field history sheets. I find that what we ask for in those, especially with clients who have been with us for years, they're so used to seeing it that they're not actually looking at it. So they've gotten rid of fields, but they forget to put it on the field history sheet, or they've combined them and then didn't do the acres. And so then when we're trying to figure things out, we're like, this stuff's not adding up, what's happening here? So it's just that. I think that when you're new and you're first transitioning, you don't know enough to know what you don't know. So then you're going to have to be guided a little bit that way. And then when you've been in it for years, it almost feels like it's mundane to a point, right? Oh God, here's OPAM's application once again. Okay, I can almost do it by heart now. But then we actually change it up sometimes and don't tell you, and then things don't get answered. So those are the tricky ones that way. So, and I think GMO statements, obviously for crops that you're getting, that you're buying, conventional, and then just livestock inventories. I know that farmers who have lots of livestock, it's not easy to remember to come back in and have it all ready. So it's just those type of things, life gets in the way and it gets time to have things available for your inspection and things aren't ready. And so everybody's scrambling. So, and what advice we give them, when you're transitioning into organic from conventional, the paperwork is overwhelming. So, and the record keeping is overwhelming. So we just like to say, you know what, to start with, for like the first 2 years, just keep everything, do it all in that way. And then as you get into it, you'll start to realize, okay, this one wasn't as necessary, or I don't need it as often. And then even if you're throwing it all in a drawer or in a tub, as long as it's all together, and then prior to your inspection, you can kind of go through and sift through it to see what you need. And then after that, it will become simple. You'll just like, oh, that's what I need. Yeah, that's what I need. And so we work with our inspectors as well to try to remind our clients that, okay, when you're going to book your inspection, remember to try to get these documents so that it's a refresher. We're sending it out in newsletters. We're on the website. We do at a glances. We're like, remember this information? You have to get that to us. So that's basically what we found. So just keep it, and then and if you're ever overwhelmed, right, you always talk to your certifier. That if you have a question, if you're not sure, that's what they're there for. So thank you.
Thank you. Catherine, do you have anything to add from your perspective? What kind of records do you request most from farmers because they might be a little bit unclear, incomplete?
Yes, so we brainstormed in office too as we tried to think of what kind of things we were asking for post-inspection last year. Some of the listed of items that we came up with was the seed documentation. We don't get a lot of items, but it's an occasional one where the seed searches are not available at the inspection. So I'm saying they're not completed, they're just not available for the inspector to view. Same thing with the seed statements, having the untreated non-GMO statements available. Things to account for on that, though, is that we only need the non-GMO for seeds that actually have a GMO partner on the market. So canola, apples, potatoes, those would be perfect examples. But if it's something like wheat or peas that don't have a GMO partner, we're just looking for untreated seed statements. So there's always some confusion with that. Something to even think about with the peas is if they are inoculated, the statement can just state what they're inoculated with. That comes into one of the other items we sometimes are having issues with, and it was a little bit more common this year, was the inputs. If you have an input that you've never used on the farm before, we found a lot of the clients didn't have the labels or the SDSs available for the inspectors to collect. And that held up certificates post-inspection just because we were having to review these inputs post-inspection, waiting for the information to come in just to find out that confirm if they're compliant or not. So tip on that one is actually if you have any inputs you're looking at using in the spring, check with your certifier early on, even when you're doing your application, because you don't want to risk putting input on that field that's going to put your field right back to conventional status, which unfortunately does happen. And that's really frustrating and a big money loss. So really encourage that one. The other odd items we tend to miss are land history affidavits for when you're obtaining new land. Advice on that one is when you're making your rental or purchase arrangements, try to get that land history signed off by the prior operator. Then, so you have it on your records available to go with your application or for the inspector to see. As a reminder, we need the 36-month history completed and we need the prior operator signing it. The final records, that we thought we'd add to the list, they're rare, which is nice because the more complex ones were the daily logs or chronological logs, whatever daily activity record you want to title it with, and the inventory records. Those tended to be another one that not a lot were missing, but we did find we had to chase after a few and again held up certificates. Advice on that one, and this one even came down from my coordinator, just take that time to document when the activities happen. We're all super busy, and as much as we have all great intentions that we're going to document it when the later, if you're like me, I'm going to forget. So just take that extra few minutes, document when on whatever resource is best for you. You don't, as Janine mentioned, you don't need to duplicate. If you're writing in a notebook in your tractor, you don't need to come home and write it on your computer. Like just have it, as long as it's documented somewhere that the inspector can see, that's perfectly fine. And then in terms of the inventory, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Some of the certifiers have different documents available you can use for whether it be storage records, harvest records, sales records. For example, Pro-Cert has documents available on their resource page for those kind of things. When you're moving your grain, just take the time to document it when it's coming off the field. If you're moving it between bins, if it's going out, basically where it came from, where it went, and how much. One of the other certification specialists had a great way to think about it. Your grain is like a bank account. So you treat your inventory records for like a bank account. You need to be knowing what's going in and out to make sure that you remain profitable. So that's kind of my mix of what documents we found, and the tips were mixed in with that.
Thank you. The next question is for Janine. So have you seen any unique or innovative ways of keeping records? I think that anyone that keeps records, we could probably all use some tips on how to do it more efficiently, or maybe a way that works better for us. So just wondering if you've seen anything different that you'd like to share.
Trying to get that. I think I'm unmuted now. It took a little bit for some reason. I would say that the most creative I've seen is pictures of when equipment is all taken apart, rather than logging equipment clean out, showing me pictures of when you one picture and you see how deconstructed that combine was, it gives you great confidence that it was thoroughly cleaned when you see it all dismantled like that. What I've had to mention to the picture guys, and so I'm finding the younger ones are using their phones more, which is great. But you still have to be able to access the picture when the inspector asks for it, just like you have to ask, you have to access the written document. If you've done a written clean out, then you have to make sure that you have your pictures organized, because a lot of guys say, oh, I've got it right here, and then there's, they don't have it right there. So you want to use your time and the auditor's time as efficiently as possible. So in terms of creativity, I would say that using their phone creatively so they don't have to duplicate efforts is the biggest thing that I've seen. And that when people know themselves, I always stress this, especially when working with a new operator that's just setting up a system, maybe they're transitioning from non-organic to organic, is that know yourself and how your own mind works. and create your systems that are easy for you. Like don't make something so complicated. It may look beautiful, but if it's too complicated, you won't use it. So in the present moment, what's easy to use in the present moment, know yourself and know your strengths and challenges so that you can build on your strengths and compensate for your challenges.
Thank you. That's good advice. And yeah, I think it's definitely worth taking some time to think about what would work best for each individual farm. So this is a question for everyone, and I guess I'll start with Catherine here. So what is your top tip for organic farmers when it comes to keeping records? Is there something that you would recommend to, new or just starting out organic farmers?
So I recommend the same way I kind of try to practice life at this point is I run by the KISS principle, keep it simple. So similar to what Janine was saying, like don't worry about whether it's complex and beautiful. You keep the records in a format that you know you're going to actually complete them in. Like if you're not electronic savvy, use the calendar, hang up in your shop or in your kitchen, use the notebook in your tractor. If you're electronic savvy, use your phone. Just keep it simple, keep it with a resource that you're going to be comfortable completing, and don't worry about reinventing wheels. If you need suggestions, talk to your neighbors, talk to the organic farmers in your circle. I mean, especially the experienced ones, take advantage of it. That would be my best advice on that one.
Thank you. Tiffany, do you have anything to add?
I think that's fantastic. I would also say read thoroughly. That is a big thing. A lot of the documents explain what they're for. And if you've read it thoroughly and you don't understand it, don't ever be afraid to call your certifier and ask. We see these documents day in and day out for years. They're second nature, but even for us, like I said, you take a break from it, you come back and we have to refresh ourselves with it. So don't ever feel ashamed that, oh yeah, you know what, you've been with your certifier for 6 years and all of a sudden you've drawn a blank on how to complete a document. Don't worry about it. Just give us a call. We'll walk you through it and we'll do that. So that's super important. I've heard a lot lately of people struggling with it for a long time until they're at the point of utter frustration, and then they call us. And I'm like, oh, we could have saved so much heartbreak, right? Like, so yeah, that would be my biggest tip: is don't be afraid to ask questions and make sure you read things through.
Thank you. Janine, do you have a top tip?
Yeah, I'd just like to briefly add, I'm seeing more and more operators saving their own seed, and make sure and document that this is so many bushels were taken out for seed, because that is really, when you're using your own seed, documenting your bin records that show when you remove the seed, even for cleaning prior to seeding, that is the paper trail for your use of your own seed. So I see that missed quite a bit. So I'd urge operators, as you increase use of your own seed, make sure and document that on your bin records.
Thanks, that's a good tip. And I guess I'll go to back to Catherine for this next question. Are there any existing resources you'd recommend for organic farmers to help them with their record keeping? I'm not sure if any organizations have, pre-made spreadsheets or things that organic farmers could make use of.
So Pro-Cert does have a resource page on their website. Under resources for the producers, you'll go into the drop-down menu to certification documents producer. And near the bottom of the page, we'll have our production and storage summary, which is our harvest records, the transportation and marketing, actually I think it's called marketing and transportation summary, which is where you can document your sales. And then we have our bin storage records there. So you're more than welcome to use them for tracking your inventory from the time you harvest through the field, any movement through the bins to the time of sales. The second page even gives examples of an optional lot number used to assist with your traceability. There's transport affidavits on there as well for when you're shipping your stuff out for the drivers to complete to show that you've inspected the vehicles. Same thing for plant sanitation affidavits for cleaning your seed. All that document's available on the resource page. And technically, because you just have to show your document, you can actually use, if you're an EcoCert client, you can use Pro-Cert records. If you're a Pro-Cert client, you prefer OPAM's record keeping system or EcoCerts, technically you can use them. So they are publicly available. So it's available to anybody, whether you're certified with Pro-Cert or not.
Thank you. Tiffany, do you have anything to add on that?
No, OPAM is the same way. Everything's on the website if you want to go that way and find it easy, or you can just contact us. But again, what Catherine said is that when you follow the standards and we follow all of the manuals that we need to, you don't have to use, like she said, the documents we provide you per se for most of it, as long as you are documenting it on something and it's the information we need is there. It can be your own spreadsheet, it can be your own scrap paper, you know, whatever it is, as long as the information's there for us to see and that you did it, we're good with that.
Thank you. And I saw that in the chat box, Laura had just shared some information, another link that I think might have some products that organic farmers could use.
Yes,
So,
the code book, Canadian Organic Growers, Record Keeping for Organic Farms. Thanks for posting that link, Laura.
We have a couple minutes. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for the panelists? Okay, if not, we will be having more questions and answers at the end of the day. So I think we will move on to our farmer panelists. The next section is a farmer panel demonstration of how they keep records on their own farms. So we have two farmer panelists here. The first is Jason Peters. Jason is an agronomist at Croker Farms and Poplar Grove Organics in Winkler, Manitoba. He works closely with the farm team to help produce a variety of organic crops, including potatoes, hemp, small grains, and green manures. And he's been on the Manitoba Organic Alliance's board of directors since 2020. The second is Karen Klassen, who farms with her dad in Manitou and has transitioned some land to organic production. She's also Manitoba Organic Alliance's executive director and has been working for the organization since 2020. So we will start by having, I'll start with Jason, and we'll start with our panelists spending a few minutes on sharing what tools they use on their own farm for organic record keeping. And then we'll go on to some questions. So we'll let you take it over from here, Jason.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks a lot, Anne. I do have a couple of slides here. I'll see if I can put them up just so that you can see. Is this going to work? Okay, can you all see this screen right here?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so how do we keep records here at Quakers? We've done things a certain way for a lot of years, and that was due to the gentleman that started the organic program here. His name is Mark Dick, and he kept things in a binder and in Excel sheets. And that's kind of where this all started. And when I came here 6 years ago, that's the way we did things. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and then also get into some of the ways that we're trying to make things better, and trying to address some of the things that Janine mentioned about duplicating records, and also making things efficient during the inspection. So being able to find things, and because we're a big farm, we have lots of records and they come from lots of different places, and so we're just trying to streamline that whole process a bit. Like I said, the old way of doing things, we kept a paper binder and some Excel sheets for different things. The paper was mostly these are for our static records. So things like when we put together that spring application or that plan, we print off a copy and put it in here. Any of the documentation around seed would go into here. Things like cleanout records, land maps, that kind of thing would all go into the binder. And it was all in one spot, so it was nice. Everybody knew where it was. And away you go. We also used Excel sheets, and these were more for the activities. So this would be for things like planting, spraying, harvest, any of our storage, some of the cleanout records, inventory, that kind of a thing. It's just faster to put things into Excel. But what we have found is that all of these things are kept in a variety of different places, and we haven't really centralized things. So we're working on trying to bring this all together and kind of create one standard for the farm. And we're doing that in, well, kind of in a bit of a unique way, I guess. We're trying to take things all digital. And so we're moving from having this paper binder and we want to be able to scan all of our papers in and put it onto a program called SharePoint, which is essentially like a cloud-based file server. And then with our Excel sheets where we have different people entering things in, activities during the day, or things that they're doing, whether they're moving grain or working in the field, we want them to be able to do that on their phone with what we're using is a custom-built app through a program called Power Apps. So it's also a Microsoft product, so these things all talk to each other. But that way, it helps solve some of these problems. And I think some of the challenges that we've had with the binder system and the Excel, they're really inaccessible to everyone unless you're in the office. So if you've been out all day working, the last thing you want to do at 9:30 or 10 at night is come back, fill out a bunch of paperwork. It's really hard to do. But everybody's on their phone, you're checking the weather for tomorrow. Well, just swipe over to the next app and let's enter things in, right? Papers, we found in a big farm tend to get lost. They get left in trucks and tractors, people forget where they are. So, we're trying to avoid some of those challenges. And what we've also found is during our inspections, we've spent hours, we can spend half an hour looking for one particular record, which we know is out there somewhere. It's just which pickup is it in, or which tractor, or who do we have to talk to, or maybe somebody's not around that day, and where is it? So we're trying to centralize all of these things. Let's see here. So with the new way of doing things, with people having access to this information on their phone, the hope is that it's easier to input. We're going to get more accurate information, and it avoids some duplication. So that kind of the system that we're working on building for record keeping is organic certification is part of it, but it will also provide information to our accounting system, to our agronomy team, to the rest of our farm team, or to, we work with other certification type programs like Canada Gap. So some of those records are useful for them as well. So we're trying to get away from asking our guys to enter things in 3 or 4 times into different places. Let's enter it in once and make it efficient, and away we go. So I think that's a good 5-minute rundown on what we do. Maybe I'll leave it at that and turn it over to Karen.
All right, thank you, Jason. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a different perspective. So I'm farm with my dad. We've got 960 acres and 160 of those are organic. So we still have both the conventional and organic sides to consider. So I was trying to, I'm with Jason, trying to, come up with stuff that is all in one place and as simple as possible. And to be honest, I haven't quite figured that out yet. So I have OneDrive, which is a Microsoft product, because I do like Excel. And at the end of the day, when I'm doing analysis or looking for stuff, I do like to put it into Microsoft products. But for simplicity, I actually like Google Drive and for data input. And so I'm exactly the same way. It's my dad and I entering in data on the fly. So in our tractors, and paper gets lost in any farm. So it doesn't matter how big your farm is. It's hard to keep track of. So I tried to come up with something I could do on my phone. So I'm going to just share with you, because it's Google. It's using Google Drive, which is free. They have Forms, which is also very simple and accessible on your phone. And I'm just going to share with you what my forms look like. So I decided, instead of having one big form for everything, I've got one for my basic operations. I've got a separate one for clean out logs, because it didn't make sense. It didn't need to be all on the same thing, because it doesn't matter. And the same for bin inventory. I've got those all in separate sheets because I'm generally doing them at different points. So with Google Forms, you just create, it's like a survey. You just create your own custom fields, whatever you need. And basically it's whatever, I'm with OPAM, so whatever OPAM needs in whatever format is easy to use from this. And then everything else I want to know as a farmer. And because, like I said, we have conventional, I want to get a lot of different information as well. That would be in addition to what the organic certifiers are using. And what I do every year is I just make a separate form. You just copy. So once you have your basic form, you just copy it. And then you're on you have the same template, and you figure out what works, and then you tweak it and work it from years to come. So this is just to give you an example of what you do. You just add questions that you want, and then however you want. If you want drop down, easy to click on things, which is what most of mine are. Then all you do is send it to your send the survey link to yourself, and you can actually, it's mobile optimized, so on your phone. This is, I've just switched screens, it looks very similar, but this is how I'd fill it out. So you just, most stuff is drop down. These are the names of my fields. You just click on whatever you want for everything. And so it's pretty simple in that way. And I've got the exact same system for my clean out logs, and it's the same thing on my phone. It looks pretty much the same. I don't know if you guys can see in a very tiny screen, but that's that's what it looks like. So like I said, I haven't quite figured out how to get it all in one place. So I do end up with spreadsheets, just to show you that you can export it as a spreadsheet. So this is the Google sheet, and then you move it into Excel easily, just download it and then put it all together into the database. And so then that makes it quite easy when it comes to looking at year history. I have it all in one big database. So you can kind of do it, depending if you're wanting to do analysis and looking at stuff easily. The one thing I, haven't captured in one place is the cost. We're using Ag Expert for a lot of financial stuff, and then I've got a totally separate spreadsheet from sort of based on looking what Alex had for cost of production as well. So I do have a few different things. I'm not sure if that's even possible to have less, but I would be very open and happy to hear about how, if anyone's come up with a more synthesized way. But so far, it seems to be working for us so far, but happy to learn from other people as well.
Thanks, Karen. I think that's super interesting. And this is going to be maybe a very silly question, but when you're doing your Google Forms, so I see you have there, you can click your field, your crop, your variety, and then you enter in something like your seeding date. Then when you go back for, say you're going to harrow your field, you open up the form again, do the same thing, click the date of harrowing, say, and then when you download it, all of those answers are in the same place?
All in one spreadsheet. So that last link or last page I showed you was one spreadsheet. And if I would have scrolled, it would scroll and scroll and scroll.
Okay.
And I have a lot of different fields all in that one sort of operations form. And it's everything from every tillage pass to inputs to, everything we do out in the fields is on that sheet.
Thanks. That's very interesting. And I think, like a good good way to use your phone in the field, and then also just be able to download that on your computer so you can see everything at once. Yeah. And then I guess like my first question for you would be, when it comes time for you to go through your inspection or send in paperwork, are you able to take that Google form, show your inspector, show the certifier, and are they able to make use of that? Or do you find that it takes quite a bit of time to reorganize that into a format that's friendly for the certifier?
Well, I put it into their spreadsheet, OPAM spreadsheet, because just for the ease of them looking at it. And I think, I thought I had to do that. So if I don't, then that'd be awesome if they could use my spreadsheet. But to be honest, it does not take that much time because I have all the information there, and it's very simple to just put. And because I don't have a huge number of fields either in organic production, it also is not that complicated or does not take that much time. They don't ask that much stuff. So I'm happy to keep doing that.
Thank you. And I suppose that's, the system that you have, you could easily make a form for bin records, or like, I'm not sure if you need a separate form for bin records, but it could be easily applicable to your inventory and bin records as well.
Yeah, I do have a separate, I actually have a separate spreadsheet for bin records because I don't necessarily do it on the fly as much. Most of the time I'm moving stuff around is in the winter where I've got more time to come and hang out inside. So I don't actually mind having that in a Excel form, but that is something, it's challenging to figure out, should I put that all in one big spreadsheet or have separate ones? But right now I have separate for bin inventory, clean out logs, and then I have all the other summertime operation, I should say, in one place.
Thanks. So I guess we have a few questions, and if anyone else has questions from the audience, like I'll ask a couple of questions, and then we can see if the audience has questions as well. So I think some of these we've answered, but maybe I'll move to you, Jason. I think you've partly answered this question, but I just wanted to know for your system, what works well and what doesn't? Like, are there things that you would like to maybe change about the system you have?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we're kind of in the middle of this transition, I guess, if you will, from more of a paper, paper trails to this digital world. And I kind of like what Karen's done there with the forms, and what you have there is essentially what we're doing with the apps in the field. So it's a good way for people to, and so that actually seems to work quite well. Our employees really like having it on their phone, because they used to have to carry around a binder with papers, and that really didn't work well. And then somebody had to go and enter all that information into a computer somewhere so that we could access it. So having it mobile is huge. One of the challenges I think with having it mobile is the fact that we don't have service everywhere on our farm. There's a lot of dead zones around it, like some of the pieces of land that we have that, try as you might, you just can't enter things in. So people still have to find a way to either remember it, or they have to make a note on it on their phone, that kind of a thing. Fortunately, some of these apps do have offline capability, so you can build that in, so you can enter it in and just sync it up when you get home at the end of the day. So we're really trying to make it as easy as possible for our employees to kind of enter things in. And then, what works well at the other end is when we get to an inspection, say, I think we're slowly getting better at pulling things up faster. Files are organized well. In the binder, we found that, if somebody else has filed something in there, you don't know if it got to the right spot. But with something like a OneDrive or a SharePoint, you just use that search bar at the top. And, like I typed in contans the other day because I was curious what kind of information we all had on it. And it came up with the current label. And it also came up with some of the Excel sheets where we had used it, some of our field history. So there's a lot of kind of power and functionality in some of those digital platforms as far as storing things. So I think some of those things are working well, and it also helps to have, we generally have one person on the farm that's in charge of our organic certification program, and so they're the ones that are helping the rest of our staff figure out, okay, this is what you need to keep record of, and this is what this is when we need it by, that kind of a thing. And so having one person to kind of coordinate systems to work well.
Thank you. Karen, do you have any comments on what works well and what doesn't in your system?
Yeah, I think, similar to what Jason said, we do have I think the connectivity can sometimes be an issue, but I think because the forms are generally available enough that even if you're offline, it'll still you can still use it. I've never had to write anything in paper so far. And it does, as soon as you do get back to a spot that has internet, it'll upload. So fingers, knock on wood, that stays the same, because that's always the danger of doing anything on your mobile on the fields. There's just definitely spots as you're in your tractor, you're driving along and you just hit a dead zone. I think, like I said, I'm trying to make sure that I feel like it can be better. I'm just not sure how yet. So I think there's a con. I just don't know what it is. But with OneDrive, we use also, we just have all of our farm folders, like everything related to the farm is in different folders on OneDrive, which is available on the cloud. So on your phone. So, if we're out in MASE calls, because we want to reseed something, I can actually access everything on my phone when I'm in the middle of the field, which is really, really helpful, compared with the old calendar system where you had to run inside to find out what your seeding date or whatever other information you had. But so for OneDrive as well, I've been saving all the seed certificates, all the documentation on GMO, that's all in one place. So then that's why, and like Jason said, it's all searchable. If we accidentally put it in the wrong folder and can't find it, it's still searchable. So you can eventually find it in the cloud somewhere.
Thank you. I guess I'll stick with you, Karen, for the next question is, how time consuming is the record keeping process on your farm? And are there certain times of the year that you find it most onerous? Like if it's the time when you're actually applying for certification, or maybe during the summer?
Probably the winter, when you actually have to think about it and sit down with all the data and decide whether you want to change. Once you have the form ready, I think it's pretty easy. It's just a matter of doing it and finding the time. Like usually it ends up, to be honest, on the Cedar, and like once we have everything going and GPS is in place, then I quickly do it, because otherwise, when I'm running around, I just would never remember to sit and think about it. So yeah, it's not that, and that's not particularly time consuming, since I'm not really doing anything else while I'm GPS is taking my tractor where it needs to go. Yeah, so I think it's more the thinking time about how I need to work things out. And during inspection, because like the last year was actually fine. This was my first actual real organic crop, and my second inspector visit. So I think it was pretty quick for me to, now that I know what I need to get together, I've saved it already. And so it actually was not that onerous at inspection time.
Thanks. And I think, Jason, you'd probably have, you're dealing with a lot more acres and more complicated farming system. Do you have, do you find, like, I guess the one question would be how time consuming it is. And then also, like, how long did it take you to set up this system with your SharePoint and the app system that you're using? Was that quite time consuming?
Yeah, good questions. As far as maybe we'll start with the last one here first. As far as the actual setup goes, I mean, setting up a SharePoint site was pretty straightforward. It takes about a minute to give it a name, and to kind of, we basically took the tabs from our binder and we made them as folders in the site, and away you go, and you start scanning things in. So that didn't take a lot of time. The app building, because organic certification is one of the many pieces that we're trying to capture records for. It's taken a bit more time, because I've had to go to each department, find out, well, what kind of things do you want from these records, and then we kind of build the apps accordingly. So if like the way this all got started for me was I was tired of typing things into a sheet, so I found this this Power Apps program, and you can basically link an Excel sheet to this app, and it will build it for you in about 2 or 3 minutes, and you can enter everything in, kind of like the forms that Karen used, the same idea. So that's really where it all got started, and then it was kind of customizing it from there. So it has taken a lot of my time, but we also, like you said before, we're a big farm with lots of employees and lots of departments to consider, and different people move in different ways. So we're just trying to get that all sorted. Takes a bit of time. As far as how much time the organic certification takes for us, there's definitely busy times and slow times. I mean, prepping our application in the spring takes quite a bit of time, because we don't just plant 2 or 3 crops. We've got multiple varieties of potatoes and onions, and a couple of varieties of hemp and this and that. And so we need 3 or 4 people kind of in their each own departments to go track down all those non-GM records, and and to bring us the slips and that kind of a thing. So most of our time is actually spent chasing down records somewhere else, and then trying to compile them and bring them together in a way that makes sense, or reminding people to get that. It's not so much about actually the collection up or the storing of it, but it's getting them from other people can be the challenge. And so yeah, so spring is busy, and then again in summertime when we know the inspection is coming, just making sure that everything's up to date and in a format that we can actually present to the inspector, because kind of like Karen, we have long, wide spreadsheets of information that really, I mean, I don't think the certifier really cares how deep we planted our hemp this year, right? Like it's not relevant. So let's pull out all the irrelevant things. So there's a bit of massaging that goes along with it to make sure that, when the inspection time comes, we're just sharing the relevant records. And then oftentimes with a farm our size, there are questions that come back from our certifier after the spring application goes in, or even after the inspection is, just some follow-ups on things. And that does tend to take quite a bit of time. So Marv, the fellow that was here before, he was our 20-year expert and seemed to be able to whip these things off pretty quick. But this year, myself and Megan, one of the other staff here, have taken it on, and we're not quite as efficient. So it does take a bit more of our time. Maybe more than we would like sometimes, but it's all for, you know, it has to be done, and
You'll get there, Jason. It's a learning curve, but it falls together. You'll get there.
Yeah, thanks, Janine.
And I think the last question I have here, I think that Jason has answered, but if there's something else you want to add, then I'm sure we'd like to hear it, is, do you have separate systems for keeping records needed by your organic certifier and other farm data? So, you know, agronomic data or financial information. So yeah, like I think it'd be nice if everyone had something in one place, but how easy is it for you to separate some of the certifier information versus agronomy versus, you know, financial documents?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We in the past have generally kept things separate because, you know, we've had individual people in charge of different things, whether it's agronomy or accounting, and so they each need different things. But now that I've kind of moved into this role of agronomy / record keeping, we're trying to standardize some of that. And so again, trying to collect all the information that we can from, you know, somebody out in the field. They're collecting, you know, what equipment they use, so that our accounting knows how much that costs, you know, the seeding rate, so that we can update our inventories and also assign a cost to that. And then, you know, whatever else, how many acres we planted, that kind of a thing for agronomy team, so we know exactly how many acres of this and that we have. So we're moving towards that centralization, and that's where we want to get, because and you can pay a lot of hours to have people type things into computers when you get to a farm our size. So we're trying to get away from that if we can.
Thank you. Karen, do you have separate record keeping systems?
Yeah.
Or is it kind of all based off the same?
Yeah, like I was saying, we have, so all of our agronomy information is all in that, what I'm calling operations data collection sheet. So anything that I need for organic certification, except for the clean out and bin inventory is in there. And then everything else that I need for anything else I want to know about our operations is in there. Yeah, so I haven't figured out how, if I actually need to, or if I want to link up our cost of production and economic systems. I don't know that it's even possible or helpful, but it does, like, that's the only thing that feels like they are separate, like they don't speak to each other. And I need, there may be some duplication. I'm just not sure how you would go about having them talk to each other. I mean, Jason probably would have an answer to that, but in our system, and again, because we're using Ag Expert as well, that's something you have to manually enter. So we are putting that in additionally and manually, and that does not speak to any of our other systems right now. And I know Ag Expert also has their own field operation collection sheet, which I'm not using at all, which I could. And I don't know if anyone else has experience with that, but that seemed like that would be total duplication of data collection, which is why I'm not using it.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the audience for Jason and Karen? I think that was like a very thorough rundown of the record keeping system, and your examples probably gave everyone here, you know, some things to think about in terms of maybe how we might want to change our record keeping as well. So I guess what we're moving on to now is a breakout group. So I believe that Catherine will be assigning us, like, putting different people in breakout groups where we will have some time to discuss what tools in terms of record keeping we all find useful and what we'd like to see developed, or maybe think about more in our own farms. So I believe that will just happen automatically once Catherine.
Yes, yeah, I will be opening rooms. I'm going to first pause the recording just because I don't want to record me just sitting in an empty room. Great, welcome back, everyone. I'll hand it back over to Anne to facilitate, I guess, the discussion on what you guys chatted about.
Sure, thanks, Catherine. So yeah, there's a number, I'm not sure how many different breakout rooms are there, but we will, maybe if one person per breakout group could talk a little bit about what what they shared or what they found. I don't know if we have a volunteer to go first. I'm not sure who was in which breakout room. So if no one volunteers, I'll have to get Catherine to choose someone.
Well, I am always a brave soul willing to break the ice, so to speak. So had a great talk. We had one phone person that didn't interact with us. Catherine and I were in a room, and Alex joined us from near the Assiniboine River, and had great success with mixing different varieties, 3 different varieties of wheat, and excellent yield despite the drought. So we mostly discussed sort of what we learned from the drought conditions last year and surviving a very challenging year. He's been certified for a few years, so feels quite confident with his record keeping system. So, and feel free to add, Alex, if you're still here on the call.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. I would say the record keeping part I find with some of the stuff that EcoCert had given to us to I guess as templates and everything has worked out really well. But for me, it's quite easy in the sense that I do all of it myself. So it's a lot easier to keep track of things than when you have multiple people working on it. And then it needs to be a little bit more organized.
So I can share a little bit about our group. I was with Karen and someone with initials TM. We unfortunately couldn't hear them, so they heard our discussion. I am at the beginning of this in terms of just recently becoming a bona fide organic farmer. So starting to figure out what all needs to be, thanks Janine, what all needs to be done. And Karen's presentation and Jason's were a real help to get me thinking on how to organize all this information. So I will be definitely following up with Karen. I think she willingly was going to share a little more information with me to get things set up. But that her program that she's using on Google Docs is readily available, makes a lot of sense, and it seems like you can tailor it pretty well. And other than that, we caught up on other events as well, how her crops went and how our crops went out here. I'm actually out of BC now. I moved from Manitoba to BC, so setting up an organic farm here in the Okanagan.
Yeah, I was as I was chatting with Alden, I'm happy to share my actual form with anyone. If it, just send us an email or send me an email, send Moa an email, whatever, and I will share that link. If you don't want to start from scratch, I'd be happy to share that with you.
Thanks, Karen. And is there anyone else from another group? I think from the group that I was in, we discussed, a bit about record keeping systems and, difficulties when more than one person is keeping records. So I think I found Karen and Jason's talk pretty, really useful in terms of just thinking about different ways of keeping records. And I'm definitely guilty of binders, notebooks, and Excel spreadsheets, which is definitely not that efficient. Yeah.
I can start listing who is in the groups who haven't spoken yet, if you want a little pressure. So in one room there was Larry Black, Patty Harris, Royden Lowen, and Tiffany Priestley. Does anyone want to share from that group what you discussed?
Oh yeah, sure, I can. We actually were on topic, and we discussed record keeping, and I think we had 3 farmers, and Tiffany, and I think we had everything from scribblers, and I think our the method that we use on our farm is also definitely called the KISS process. That's basically make sure that you have a 32-year-old son who's studying agriculture someplace where you can delegate the responsibilities to. But having said that, no, we actually do we have notes. We just have a simple iPhone with shared notes, and so we keep on just dating. And when you're on the tractor, you can update the notes in terms of what you're seeding and the rate and all that, and what when you ship, and so that's shared then, and so the partners can sort of look over each other's shoulders to make sure that everything is kept. So, and then actually, Patty, if you want to jump in and tell us, I was so mesmerized by the scribblers that I forgot to listen to what you said, but I just remember being impressed that it seemed sophisticated.
I use just a spreadsheet where I like to put each field out and chronologically whatever we do to the field. And then we also have a WhatsApp group between the three of us. And the goal is that every time someone is doing something on a field, that they just send a WhatsApp text. Let's say they're seeding, they just say the date that they're seeding and the rate. And then later on, we can just easily input it into that Word document.
I think that's a great idea for keeping on top of things. I think that's something like, I know we find sometimes that, you go to clean out a truck, or you go to clean out a bin, or make sure something's been done and it's already been done, but you don't know who did it or when they did it or what was in there last. So that's kind of, having just a simple text system would solve some problems for some farms, I'm sure.
We have one more group who hasn't shared yet. There was Glenn Elliott, Jason Peters, Jason Stutka, and Jeremiah Evans. If somebody from that group feels like sharing, it'd be great.
Sure, I can give a summary of what we talked about. I think we were mostly on topic with the discussion, kind of talked about some of the record keeping systems that are used, and Glenn made a comment about similar to the WhatsApp idea, using text messages from employees to keep track of what's been done, which can be helpful to go back a couple of days to remember what's been done where. We also heard a bit about kind of an office setup where where there's calendars and clipboards and everything's organized and all the records are in one place, and no need to transcribe it to digital if it's already all there on paper. Seems to work pretty well. So yeah, I don't know. That's the Coles Notes version, I think.
Could I say something, Anne?
Oh, of course.
I just wanted to thank you for that breakout. It's interesting when you sit behind the desk and you're in your office. We have our name of our contacts who we talk to, but it's easy to forget that these operations have multiple people doing the work. And so that is not something that we are always conscious of. And so hearing the struggles that are happening and how you're trying to battle keeping that information all together is quite enlightening. And it kind of makes me go, oh, okay, a little bit bigger of a break when you're talking to people and they're like, I don't have my information ready. And because you don't realize what they're all going through. And so I know, like with OPAM, we try, because you have a whole bunch of variety of people and what they're capable of doing and how they like to keep notes. We send out a pocket calendar book because people like that, and we go on what the board is, the majority of the board is, but I like the idea of more and more people using their iPhones and keeping documents and definitely pictures. The downfall of that on our end is that when we are inundated with pictures, the files are huge. So then when we tried to, we found out when we went to do our audit this year with CAQ, and it was remote and we had to send files to them, we were breaking files down into 8, 9 emails because the pictures were so big. I mean, it's great to have, and it's a great option for us to see, but that is just another battle you fight with the size of data and the amount of data you have on files than when you're doing it electronically that way. So I don't know if there's ever a great fit, but I liked Karen's, the OneDrive idea. I like that. That's how that worked and how that was set up. So I just want to thank everybody for what you've contributed and what you've commented on. It's very helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I found this conversation very helpful, and I hope that everyone else in attendance did as well. Are there any, so we do have some time for questions from the audience or more discussion if anyone has additional comments.
Yeah, I have a question. Can I ask
Yes.
it? Actually, it's actually to the, do we have all three inspectors here? Janine and Tiffany and Catherine. My question is, like, what would the three of you say is the most common error that farmers make that you spot time and time again, or that, you know, one or two or three most common errors? Or put a different way, what do you nail farmers on most often?
I spoke earlier. I'll just start by saying I mentioned the bin records, not having detailed bin records for their seed use. Because when they're using your own seed, it's only the bin record of when it was harvested from what field and into what bin. That's the only documentation we have for use of that seed. So it's very important that that be completed.
Okay, but
so that's the most common thing I see for operators who are using.
My question is, what do you spot most often? Like, you're all been around the corner.
And the second one to that, and then I'll give someone else a chance. The second most common thing is discrepancies between the actual seeded acres and what the field histories say. And so I'm always updating the field histories to what the acres were for that year, and trying to make notes so that the reviewers understand that yes, this is a 155 acre field, but this year, because there was no sloughs, they were actually able to harvest 159 acres because they could seed right through the sloughs. So that variation of acreage on fields is the most common discrepancy, and needing to balance it all out and explain clearly why it's different one year from another year. So those are my two most common. Next.
I was trying to think while Janine was talking. This was one of those inspection years where I didn't have a common thing that I wrote repeatedly for every second inspection. Typically that happens every year. This year I didn't, so I had to really think about it. Probably in terms of like when I was out there, the top thing I actually saw was people not mowing around their bins. That's not really a record keeping issue, but that was probably one of the top things I had to come across. A lot of guys don't want to clean them up till right before harvest, but unfortunately, that's usually what attracts rodents to the bins, and the standard is rope for good management practices first, before then to approved substances, then exemptions. If all else fails, you can use a prohibited substance with law documentation in place and insurance. There's nothing contaminating your grain. So that would probably be my top one, is just finding the management practices around the bins in question, whether it be not mowed, somebody decide to spray under them, things like that. Record keeping wise, I would say was the seed documentation. Not saying they didn't do their seed searches or get untreated seed, they just didn't have any of the documentation available for review during the inspections. And probably inventory records would be the other one, similar to Janine. Typically it's the break and traceabilities, finding there's information from the time it's harvested to the bins, if it moved between bins to the time of sale, and where it went. So from the harvest record all the way to the transport documents is having little breaks in among those records that I can't link them through, whether it be they missed documenting a grain movement. So there's this amount of grain missing that, you know, kind of got forgotten about because there was a movement in grain, and say they cleaned it, so 50 bushels is missing or something like that. So I would think those were probably my top areas I would see during inspections.
I'd say the top, I'd have to agree with Janine. As I'm not out in the field, but getting it back after an inspection for the certification review portion is the not lining up and working with the field history sheet. So the acres, what was actually seeded, what was actually there. I know we're not as picky as what we had been in the past. But it comes back to when the inspector is estimating your yield, and if the acres that you seeded don't match the acres that you're giving us that we are on the document, things don't always line up. So then, and it causes more digging than what is necessary, because it's a simple fix and it's just a simple oversight. So I think that, because that's where a lot of fraud can happen too, right? When things don't match up and all of a sudden you are harvesting these massive amounts, but yet your field history sheet says you've only got so many acres, and you're just like, this isn't possible. So I think that's a big one when it comes to that. Another one from a certification point of view is, which was touched on here, was your inputs that you're using. If it isn't pre-approved, we don't ever want to come across as we're telling you how to farm, but it is so much easier to have a review done prior to you using that product than what has to happen afterwards if you go ahead and use it and it's not allowed. Like, that is absolutely heartbreaking. And we try to make that note everywhere possible that, you know, please ask. If it's on a list, please ask. If you're not sure, please ask, because once it's done, it's done. And there's no taking that back. And we would hate for people to lose status and lose fields and lose crops over an oversight that, you know, it could have been prevented. So I think those are our two biggest ones, is make sure we're not going to tell you how to farm, but we really want to make sure that what you're using is allowable so that there's no issues.
Thanks. I hope that answered your question, Royden. Are there any other questions?
I just have a comment, and for reducing the size of pictures, if people are taking pictures a lot on their iPhone and sending them in with their documentation, if you're taking pictures of documents, just use your notes button on your iPhone, and then you can scan things on the go, and it reduces the size by like 90%.
Thanks. That's a great tip for people.
I don't know if it was already said before or not, but
I don't think so.
yeah. And you can organize them by folders then and stuff like that in your notes. Kind of cool. Anyways.
Thanks. That's a good, this makes me realize I need to figure out more of the notes function on the phone, because that's sounds like a useful tip. Any other last comments from people or questions? Well, if not, I think this was a very useful session, and hopefully everyone got a lot out of it. So I think we'll end our session for today. So I just wanted to thank everyone for participating. It was great to see lots of people out, and to thank all of our speakers for their time today. So thanks again to our sponsors, the Government of Canada and the Canadian Agricultural Partnership, Prairie Organic Development Fund, and Roquette Canada. And I hope to see everyone here at the Prairie Organic Conference, February 8th and 9th. And just a reminder that today was the last day for early registration for that savings. So thank you everyone for coming out to this event.